Chapter 551. Who knew if they would seize the opportunity to soar into the sky? But when these words were asked by Yang Chendong, everything was a different story. Who was Yang Chendong? He was the sixth young master who must be respected in the eyes of the higher-ups. He was the god of war in the eyes of the soldiers. He was the Eastern commander in the eyes of the young girls. He was the god in the eyes of the common people. He was the Duke of Loyalty in the Great Ming Dynasty. He was the founder of Wuxia, the creator of the mercenary army, and everyone's Bo Lu. It was not an exaggeration to say that if Yang Chendong hated someone, then no matter how great that person's achievements were, he would immediately lose everything. Don't think that it was impossible. This was the consensus formed in the feudal society. Here, no one would talk about human rights with you. Otherwise, when an emperor dealt with his subjects, he would have to discuss with the other ministers, look at everyone's faces, and even hold an open election. From this point alone, Yang Chendong was the king of Chichen City, and the only king. If he was unhappy, then no one would have a good time. Obviously, the current Yang Chendong was indeed a little angry. After everyone realized this, they immediately became nervous and careful. Yang Chendong saw the change in their attitude, but he was not satisfied. Who knew how many of these people really knew that they were wrong, and not just putting on an act? Therefore, he needed to point out everyone's problems. Although this would make some people unhappy for a while, it didn't matter as long as it was sincerely for them. Do you think you are very powerful? Or do you think that you are already invincible in the world, and you don't put others in your eyes? Yang Chendong asked in a deep voice when everyone was quiet. When Yang Chendong was angry, Tiger Mane and Beta Persei immediately puffed out their chests. Then, under their silence, the members of the first security team who were in charge of security around the conference room began to rub their hands together, as if they were waiting for the sixth young master's order to arrest them. The change in the atmosphere in the conference room made some of the officers who just wanted to put on a show feel nervous at this moment. When they noticed that the sixth young master was not joking with them, and was about to get serious in a fit of anger, many people began to reflect. Could it be that they were really too arrogant? Just as these people woke up, Yang Chendong's voice came out of the conference room again. Pat your chests. You were able to obtain today's victory was not because the firearms in your hands were too advanced. Before the enemy could reach you, they were already killed by you. If you didn't have advanced firearms, how could you defeat the enemy? Do you know that, in a cold weapon battle, even if we had the help of firearms, we still suffered hundreds of casualties in the battle with the Miao army? You boast about your strong combat power, but this is actually just a joke. It's all because our soldiers are well trained, the firearms in the army's hands are powerful, and we made a serious plan before the war. Do you really think it's your credit? If it is, which one of you will bring a big sword and a spear to me and win a battle with a small army? That will make me admire him. Which one of you can guarantee that you can do it? One question after another came out of Yang Chendong's mouth, making the officers speechless. Yes, thinking about it carefully, wasn't the reason why they were able to win so many battles because the quality of the soldiers was relatively close, they obeyed discipline and listened to orders, they planned carefully before the war, the source of information was timely and accurate, and they also had the most advanced firearms in their hands? Although these victories were attributed to them, in fact, what difference would it make if someone else was in command? Maybe they didn't do as well as they did, but there was another possibility. Maybe they did better than them. Thinking of this, the pride on their faces disappeared and was replaced by deep self-blame. They now knew that, in a real war, they didn't play a big role. At least, it was much smaller than they thought. Their pride was gone, and their self-blame increased. Yang Chendong noticed the change in the atmosphere and his expression became better. As the saying goes, one cannot achieve anything without polishing. They had only just wiped out Jiaoji and occupied half of the Shang dynasty. Yet some of them were already excited. If they didn't stop the wind from blowing, who would be able to control these people in the future? Sixth young master, it's our fault. We political cadres didn't do our part. Seeing Yang Chendong get angry and even reprimand them, someone had to take responsibility. The political commissar of the 1st Regiment of the 1st Division, Mo Changyu, took the initiative to stand up and take responsibility. Following Mo Changyu's action, the other political commissars also stood up, such as Kong Jie, Chen Bo, Ji Fei, and the others. Some of them had just become political commissars, like Chen Bo. Logically speaking, such a thing had nothing to do with them. However, Yang Chundong knew that this was only on the surface because they never thought of themselves as political cadres. Using Chen Bo as an example, he still thought of himself as the commander of the 2nd Battalion of the 3rd Regiment. In his eyes, the political commissar of the 3rd Regiment was just a part-time job. It only meant that he had been promoted. If that was all, it would not be enough. They would have let down Yang Chundong's expectations of them. The reason why the People's Liberation Army was able to win despite being outnumbered and ultimately achieve victory was because of the political cadre's hard work. Command of the party was not just for show. It was because of this that there was no mutiny among the soldiers. Yang Chundong did not think of using this method because he did not want to establish a party right now. This was not because it did not fit the current situation, but because he did not have the ability to do so. There were some things that if you did not have the ability to do it, it would be easy to draw a tiger but end up like a dog. Therefore, he felt that it was necessary to establish a new department. He could use today's opportunity to establish this department. His gaze first fell on Mo Changyu and the other political workers. Then he nodded and said, "You all have responsibilities. I have taught you before to grasp the hearts of the people and to establish ideological work. This is to increase the fighting power of the army. These two things complement each other, just like how a person needs 2 legs to walk. However, it is clear that you did not listen to these words. Therefore, to show that you are not responsible for your work, each of you will be given a demerit. Do you have any objections?" There were rewards in the army, so naturally, there were punishments. When it came to punishments, there were demerits and major demerits. These demerits were not to be underestimated. They were not only written, but also recorded in one's personal file. Moreover, each person could only have 5 demerits and 3 major demerits. If they exceeded these limits, then they would either be demoted or have to leave the army. Therefore, being given a demerit was something that many officers were afraid of. After all, for many people, their days in the army were still long. No one could guarantee that they would not make any mistakes. However, once they accumulated to a certain extent, who knew how many demerits would be given? Now that Yang Chundong had opened his mouth and said that Mo Changyu and the others had passed, their faces became ugly. However, this was given to them by Yang Chundong, so they could not refuse. At this moment, they could only pinch their noses and accept it. Among them, Chun Bo was even more unconvinced after accepting it. He had just been promoted to political commissar, and he had not done anything yet. Although he understood this kind of work, being given a demerit as a new officer was not something that anyone was willing to accept. Fortunately, after Yang Chundong gave them a stick, he gave them a sweet date. In order to show the importance and necessity of political work, I have decided to establish a new department. It will be called the Political Department. Its rank will be the same as the military. I will be the head of the Political Department. The first batch of committee members will be Mo Changyu, Kong Jie, Chun Bo, and Ji Fei. In the future, when it comes to the evaluation and promotion of officers, not only will the military have to give their opinions, but the political department will also have to give their opinions. Only those who pass both examinations can be promoted to military officer. Otherwise, they won't be able to pass. Does anyone have any opinions? Suddenly establishing a political department and promoting it to the same rank as the military was something that many people did not expect. This was like putting another layer of shackles on the heads of all officers. In the future, not only would they have to listen to the military, but the political department would also become like a new father. It would be impossible to say that no one had any opinions. However, in front of Yang Chundong, especially when everyone was so proud of themselves, who would dare to take the lead? Mo Changyu and the others, who were not responsible for anything, were given a demerit. What did they say? Therefore, when Yang Chundong asked for everyone's opinion, no one stood up to oppose. On the contrary, the 2 big shots in the military, Leng Song and Gao Xiong, spoke out in support. We support the 6th Young Master's establishment of the political department. Leng Song and Gao Xiong spoke out in support. They had no choice but to do so. Otherwise, it would give others the impression that they wanted to monopolize everything. Why? Was the military so powerful? Couldn't there be any restrictions on their existence? More importantly, were they not going to listen to the 6th Young Master's words? Leng Song and Gao Xiong, who were already vice ministers of the military, would not allow others to hold them back. They immediately spoke out in support. Since the 2 division commanders had the same attitude, the other officers naturally raised their hands in support. Although some of these people might have different opinions, it did not matter. The minority obeys the majority. Chapter 552. Furthermore, if there was something that could only be done after everyone agreed to it, then there would be nothing left in the world that could be done. Some people had opinions but didn't dare to voice them out. However, some people didn't have any opinions at all. For example, the committee members of the political department. They had just been marked down and were feeling indignant. Now that they had a new position and could even decide on an important part of the military officer evaluation, it meant that they had more power in their hands. This would make their work much easier in the future. After all, this was related to their personal benefits. Who would dare to not take it seriously? Among these people, Chun Bo was the happiest. He was already a regimental officer. He had just become a committee member of the military headquarters. Now, he was also a committee member of the political department. He was the only one who was a committee member of both. How could he not be happy about it? As for when he could only be a committee member of one department, he would have to make a choice. However, it didn't matter. He was already the first committee member of 2 departments, wasn't he? This was enough. This would become the capital that he could show off to others in his life. He didn't care about what others thought. After Yang Chendong announced the establishment of the political department, he took over the baton from Leng Song. Then, he came to the sand table and began to explain the battle plan. After Yang Chendong explained the battle plan that he had in mind, he also emphasized on the enemy's cannons. Those are cannons that can hit a mile away, although they can't be compared to the cannons in our hands. However, if we don't get rid of them, once the soldiers charge, they will be facing death. Although there are always casualties in war, I still hope that everyone can take the lives of the soldiers seriously. In the future, military achievements will not only depend on how many people you kill, but also how many people you lose. This will be done by the political department. Great, this increased the work of the political department and also increased their power. However, this was for the sake of the soldiers' lives. No one could raise any objections. For a moment, the officers could only nod and agree. The final decision of the meeting was to launch the war horn 3 days later. They would use 10 days to eliminate the first Shang dynasty and let Ryukyu Island become Yangtze's first base. In comparison, 3 days to prepare was already a lot of time. After all, the first Shang dynasty wasn't far away from the first Shang dynasty. Lung Feng was the main force of the soldiers participating in the battle, with the auxiliary soldiers as support. If it wasn't for the fact that the Navy needed more time to prepare, the mobilization order would have been issued today and the army could have set off the day after tomorrow. After arranging the work, Yang Chendong turned around and left the building under the protection of the guards. Leng Song and Gao Xiong, who originally wanted to ask the 6th young master to stay for dinner, didn't have the chance to speak. Division Commander Leng, could it be that 6th young master is angry at us? Standing at the gate of the military headquarters, after watching Yang Chendong leave, the Marine Division Commander Gao Xiong couldn't help but ask, "Can't you tell? I say, Commander Gao, your Navy officers are a little too arrogant. You should reorganize them." Leng Song turned his head and said with some annoyance. Due to the fact that the Navy had advanced ships and cannons, they had been unrivaled on the sea since the beginning. After a long time, they naturally became arrogant and complacent. Being criticized in public, Gao Xiong's face didn't look too good. However, he wasn't someone to be trifled with. He immediately retorted, "I admit that some of the Navy officers are a little arrogant, but is your army any better? Since when did you look down on others just because you have guns? Commander Gao, please don't worry about this. I will naturally take care of the army's matters. Even if we don't care, the political department will. You're on your own now. Lung Song turned around and left after saying this. It was obvious that he was a little angry. As someone who was chosen by Yang Qindong, Leng Song's achievements today were already beyond his expectations. After his desires were satisfied, he was worried about losing everything he had, so he would often consider many things when he did things. Things like being cocky would never happen to him. However, if he didn't do this, the officers under him would get carried away. This time, they were implicated by these people. In the past, when he saw this kind of thing happen, he always thought that these officers' fighting ability was very strong, so he turned a blind eye to it. But now that the sixth young master was angry, if he didn't do something, once the political department stepped in, it would be really embarrassing. So now he had to do something. Commander Gao Xiong also had the same idea as Leng Song. No one knew better than him what kind of soldiers he led. Yang Qindong's suggestion was also very correct. But in order not to disappoint his brothers, Gao Xiong didn't say anything. Gao Xiong was originally a pirate. Even if he was in his current position, he still had a bandit nature in his heart. This was also why Yang Qindong didn't say anything to them and directly announced the establishment of the political department. He believed that after today's matter, these two commanders should know what to do. Of course, if they still didn't know what to do, then Yang Qindong didn't mind moving them to another position. This was not to get rid of the donkey after it had outlived its usefulness. On the contrary, it was to protect them. Otherwise, in the long run, they would continue to walk on the wrong path. Until one day, even if he wanted to pull these two people back, he was afraid that he would be powerless to do so. Yang Qindong returned to the palace under the protection of a group of guards. Seeing that the guards had gone to their posts, Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei, who were following behind him, approached and asked, "Sixth young master, do you need to arrange for people to keep an eye on those officers?" The deputy director of the security bureau, Yang San, did not follow them to Resin City. Instead, he went to the Great Ming Dynasty to check on the work. After all, he had been away for a while, and he needed to have first-hand information for some intelligence work. This was conducive to Yang Qindong's next decision. In Yang San's absence, Tiger's Mane, as the director, took on the responsibility. He asked this because Yang Qindong's decision in the military conference room was too sudden. He was afraid that some of the officers would take things too hard and cause problems. Keep an eye on them? Keep an eye on who? Yang Qindong turned his head and asked as if he didn't understand. Of course, it's to keep an eye on those officers in the meeting. Tiger's Mane had an expression that said it should be so. There's no need. Who knew? Yang Qindong decisively refused. They are the backbone of the army, and their loyalty is reliable. As for the fact that they can't think straight for a while, it's understandable. When faced with new things, do you always give people time to adapt? How about this? Go and inform Leng Song and Gao Xiong to invite them to the palace for dinner tonight. Yang Qindong didn't want to suspect any of his subordinates. Unless it was necessary, he disdained to keep an eye on them. Don't suspect those you use, don't use those you suspect. He also believed that, under the big picture, unless they really couldn't achieve anything, no one would have any other ideas. Of course, if someone really did that, Yang Qindong would naturally kill them mercilessly. If they were brothers, he would naturally share their blessings. But if they were enemies, then blood would definitely be spilled. Tiger's Mane sent the message. Yang Qindong turned around and walked towards the depths of the palace. In the large square of the palace, waves of pleasant laughter could be heard. Sister Shui, don't panic. Keep your breathing steady. Just hold on and use your legs to push forward. This voice belonged to the fifth Madame Su Man. Originally, she wanted to kill Yang Qindong, but in the end, she was influenced by him. After a beauty loves a hero, she came to Crimson City. Here, her vision and thoughts were greatly impacted, and she quickly fell in love with this place. Especially when Yang Qindong deliberately pretended to be poisoned for her. Nan Ming didn't have the slightest intention of clearing her grandfather's name. This made Su Man completely disappointed in Nan Ming. She turned around and placed her heart on Yang Qindong. Her heart was liberated, and she became cheerful. At this moment, the laughter was so pleasant and pleasant. Yang Qindong made a shushing gesture to Beta Persei behind him. Then he moved lightly to the side of the square and saw the third Madame, Xiao Yuxue, Madame Shui, nervously riding on the bicycle. Speaking of the bicycle, Yang Qindong called Feng Ku, who had the potential to be a scientist. After passing the blueprint to him, he didn't disappoint. In just a few days, the first bicycle was born. This morning, it was sent to the palace. Yang Qindong happened to be absent, so it was given to the three madams. The first madam, Hu Yan, rode it for a while. She was a little scared after falling down, so Madame Shui began to try it. Watching the fun was not afraid of making things worse. Most of the time, there were some things that people thought were very simple when they saw others doing it. Just like Su Maner now, because she had never ridden before, but with Hu Yan's experience, she knew the principle behind it. She immediately began to comment on Madame Shui who was riding the bike. Her voice wasn't soft. Madame Shui was still trying. Although she fell down at first, she had experienced too many hardships due to her background, so she didn't take the fall seriously at all. Instead, she continued to try. Except for the two maids supporting and protecting her, she rode very seriously and put a lot of strength on her legs. You shouldn't use so much strength. Seeing that Madame Shui was treating the bicycle like an enemy and was about to crush it, Yang Qindong finally couldn't help but come out from the dark and began to guide her. Yang Qindong's sudden appearance startled Madame Shui, and she lost her balance on the bicycle and fell to the grass beside her. This scene caused the two maidservants beside her to scream, but it was obviously a little too late to help her up now. Chapter 553. Yang Qindong was at least 20 meters away from Madame Snow. He moved his feet and shot out like a bullet. He came to the side of the bicycle and hugged Madame Snow, who was about to touch the ground. Hiss! That's too fast. Looking at the sixth young master, who was standing in front of him a moment ago, but in the blink of an eye, he was already 20 meters away. Yang Shuang's eyes were filled with suspicion. He definitely couldn't achieve such speed. However, considering that the young master was a freak, Beta Persei was not the one who called him that. Many guards recognized him as a freak. Yesterday, Yang Qindong finally defeated the 20 guards of the first guard squad by himself. Yang Qindong, who was with the three ladies, seemed to be stronger than before. It was reasonable for him to be so fast in the face of such a freak. Madame Snow thought she would fall to the ground, but now she was in Yang Qindong's warm arms. She could not help blushing. Although they often did some shameful things when there was no one around, and even did it with her sisters, she would still blush in front of outsiders. This was the reservedness of modern women. "Honey, can you teach me how to ride a bicycle?" Madame Snow asked, trying to suppress her shyness. She did not know why she was so bold. However, she did not consider that the bicycle was newly made. It was probably the first time that Yang Qindong had seen it. Madame Snow did not care about that. In her eyes, Yang Qindong was omnipotent. She believed that he would not let her down. As expected, Yang Qindong nodded. First, he helped Madame Snow to stand up. Then, he reached out to lift up the bicycle. He stepped on the leather seat with his right leg. After feeling it for a while, he exerted force on his foot. Then, the bicycle slowly moved forward under his command. Riding on the bicycle, while feeling the performance of the bicycle, Yang Qindong said aloud, "This is a men's 28 bicycle. The frame is too high and is not suitable for girls to ride. In the future, if you want to ride it, I can arrange for them to make a smaller one for you." Yang Qindong was already very good at riding the bicycle as he spoke. In his previous life, he did not ride the bicycle many times. He did not ride it as much as he did before he became a soldier. However, he had learned how to ride it a long time ago. With the changes in his body, it was a piece of cake. Besides, he could ride planes and tanks easily. This was child's play. Under his manipulation, it didn't take long for him to ride the bicycle with both hands. Compared with other people who would fall down if they gripped the handle too hard, Yang Qindong could ride it so well without holding the handle. This scene instantly made the three ladies admire him. Even the maidservants were trying their best to hold back their screams as their bodies trembled with excitement. The maids who could serve Yang Chendong were happy and unlucky. They were happy because they could often see the sixth young master, the man they admired so many times in their hearts. They were unhappy because they had been with Yang Chendong for a long time. They were always willing to compare other men with him. How could there be any comparison? If they kept going back and forth, other men would naturally not enter their eyes. This would greatly affect their marriage in the future. Of course, these maids had a dream in their hearts. That was to be favored by Yang Chendong one day, even if they could only be his concubine. Just like in some rich families, the maids, especially the beautiful ones, might fly to the branches and become phoenixes. However, for some reason, Yang Chendong never did that. At least, no maids could have such an honor. But it did not matter. If they could not do it now, they could wait. There should be a chance. After riding the bicycle for a while, Yang Chendong found that all the functions of the bicycle were very good. The running in of all the parts was also very smooth. He could not help but feel satisfied and stopped the bicycle elegantly. Seeing this scene, the women's eyes were full of stars. Their admiration was very clear. "Haha! Come on! Sit on the back seat and try it." Yang Chendong smiled and pointed to the back seat of the bicycle. Can I? Madame Shui was obviously eager to try, but she still asked shyly. Sister Shui is timid. You can try it. Hu Yen saw Madame Shui's shyness and could not help but smile at Su Menair, who was sitting beside her. Okay. Su Menair naturally knew that Hu Yen was provoking Sister Shui, but she still nodded cooperatively. She looked as if she wanted to get up, so did she. Madame Shui could not take it anymore. Without hesitation, she leaned over and sat on the back seat of the bicycle. Haha! Looking at Madame Shui's anxious look, Yang Chendong could not help but laugh. Then he said, "Hold on tight to my waist." Then the bicycle sped up like a gust of wind, reaching a speed of at least 40 kilometers per hour. Madame Shui, who was sitting on the back seat, could only feel the things in front of her flying backward. She was so excited that she hugged Yang Chendong's waist tightly. She looked happy. After Madame Shui, Yang Chendong picked up Hu Yen and Su Menair. He had no choice. When there were many women, everything required fairness. After riding the bicycle for more than an hour, Yang Chendong was sweating a little. Satisfied, he stopped the bicycle and pointed at Beta Persei, who was drooling not far away, and said, "Come on, try it. Look at you, your clothes are wet with saliva." When Yang Chendong pointed at him, Beta Persei quickly looked down at his military uniform, but there was nothing there. Then he heard a woman's laughter. Only then did he realize that the young master was teasing him. However, he didn't care so much anymore. He smiled and strode toward the bicycle. Just now, he had seen the sixth young master ride for a long time and thought that he was familiar with the technique. In addition, he was tall and had long legs, so it should not be a problem for him to control it. Yang Chendong returned to Hu Yen and the others. As soon as he sat on the chair, someone fed him all kinds of fruits. He looked very comfortable. Plop! Just as Yang Chendong ate a piece of orange, the sound of something hitting the ground was heard. Needless to say, it was Beta Persei who did not control the bicycle well and fell to the ground. It was not necessary to control the bicycle well with the length of one's legs. In a situation where he did not know how to master balance, and it was his first contact, Beta Persei quickly made a fool of himself and fell to the ground. Because of his tall stature, the fall made a lot of noise. His posture was also very inelegant. One of his left thighs and half of his body were under the bicycle. Ha ha! Ha ha ha! The madams were stimulated by this scene and laughed. Obviously, they had forgotten the scene where they fell while riding the bicycle. On the other hand, Beta Persei had a persevering spirit. He quickly got up and continued to practice. But from time to time, the handlebars would still shake. However, with the advantage of his long legs, he did not fall down a few times. However, cold sweat came out of his body, which attracted the laughter of the madams. Just like that, the afternoon passed by happily. At dinner time, Lung Song and Gao Xiong each brought their madams to the palace. Calling their madams showed that they were close. This way, they could also quickly get closer to each other. As soon as the two madams arrived, they were pulled to the side by Hu Yen and the others. Naturally, the two teachers sat next to Yang Chendong. When the food and wine were served, the atmosphere at the table quickly became lively. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Leng Song and Gao Xiong toasted Yang Chendong a lot of wine. The sixth young master was not invited. With the existence of that qi, as long as he wanted to, he could expel the alcohol at any time. Therefore, sometimes there was no difference between drinking wine and drinking water for him. Wine was often the best lubricant and additive. It could quickly get closer to each other. After a while, the relationship between Yang Chendong, Leng Song and Gao Xiong became much closer. After 3 rounds of food and 5 rounds of wine, Hu Yen and the other two madams left the table with Leng Song and Gao Xiong's madams. When only the 3 of them were left at the table, Yang Chendong opened his mouth. "How is it? Do you have any opinions about what I did during the day?" "Ah, we don't dare." Leng Song and Gao Xiong quickly waved their hands. "Do you not dare, or do you not dare to say it?" Yang Chendong looked at Leng Song and Gao Xiong's eyes and stared closely. Being stared at like this, the two lowered their heads. After today's meeting, the news of the establishment of the political department spread. Mo Changyu and the others had already chosen a building not far from the military headquarters. In fact, this was something Yang Chendong had planned for a long time. However, when this news came out, many low-level officers came to express their dissatisfaction. In their eyes, this was a sign that the sixth young master did not appreciate them and wanted to deal with them. Regarding the dissatisfaction of the officers, the 2 division commanders did not say anything. However, it was impossible to say that they did not have any opinions. They thought that they had done a good job, but why did the sixth young master want to establish a political department? Did he not like them? Did he want them to move? When people encounter a problem, they would not think about why it happened. Instead, they would think about how to solve the problem and what signal it represented. The 2 of them naturally wondered if the sixth young master really did not trust them anymore. If that was the case, what should they do next? Both of them were division commanders. It was impossible to say that they did not have a group of trustworthy brothers. Although the soul of the Yang army was Yang Chendong, he did not lead the army for a long time. Therefore, many low-level officers ignored the existence of the sixth young master. If they were to make a move at this time, there would be some forces in the army that would be biased towards them. They could then put pressure on Yang Chendong. Chapter 554. Of course, this was just a thought. They wouldn't actually do it. After all, he had only set up the political department. He hadn't done anything to them yet, had he? At this moment, Tiger's man appeared and personally told them that the sixth young master had invited them to dinner. The 2 of them immediately guessed that Yang Chendong wanted to ask them about the political department. If one didn't do anything wrong, they wouldn't be afraid of ghosts calling at their door. They hadn't done anything wrong. They hadn't even said anything unkind. Naturally, they weren't afraid. On the contrary, the 2 of them were still thinking about whether or not they should mention their suggestions and thoughts during dinner. Now that Yang Chendong had finally taken the initiative to say it, it was within their understanding. However, when he suddenly asked if they didn't dare to say it, cold sweat poured out of their foreheads. They could feel that Yang Chendong was very serious. However, before they could think of how to answer, Yang Chendong opened his mouth again. This time, he said with a very serious expression, "The 2 of you were the first batch of people to follow me. You were also chosen by me. I have to say that you 2 have some ability. However, I still want to say this. If it wasn't for the young master, what would the 2 of you be doing? Leng Song, are you still wandering the Jianghu? Dreaming of becoming a hero? Maybe you could save some people, but maybe you wouldn't even have a corpse left. And you, Gao Xiong, are you still a water bandit? Maybe you've grown stronger, or maybe you've been taken over by others. Who knows?" Yang Chendong brought up their past. This was something they didn't want to face. Especially Gao Xiong. He was a water bandit. It wasn't something to be proud of. In the past, when someone brought it up, he would very likely fight with them. However, this matter was brought up by Yang Chendong. He couldn't say anything. After all, what he said was the truth. The two of them stopped talking. Yang Chendong continued, "Now that the two of you are the leaders of a division, I naturally trust you. But do you really have nothing to worry about? I don't know if you've ever thought about it, but if one day someone uses your past as an excuse to attack you and even wants to deal with you, what will you do? Am I covering up for your little problems? Or do you support those people to take you down?" This, Leng Song and Gao Xiong wanted to explain. But no one was perfect. Who could guarantee that they wouldn't make any mistakes and wouldn't have any problems? If someone really did not want to let it go, that small problem could become a big problem. He thought that if that was really the case, not to mention keeping his position, even keeping his life would be a difficult matter. Due to the environment they had grown up in, it was destined that they were innately incompetent when it came to scheming against each other and fighting for power. This was their shortcoming. If someone really wanted to use such methods against them, they would be powerless to fight back. Their expressions kept changing. Yang Chendong saw all of this. He let out a long sigh. "If I say that the establishment of the political department is a form of protection for you, would you believe me? With the existence of the political department, there will be someone to supervise your authority. While you make fewer mistakes, the political department can also share some of the firepower for you. Isn't this the best of both worlds? Moreover, your authority won't be reduced. It's just that there's an extra procedure when promoting officers. But for those officers who are truly capable and perform well, would there be any problems because of an extra check? On the other hand, it's those problematic officers who want to take advantage of others who will have a headache." After Yang Chendong's analysis, Leng Song and Gao Xiong suddenly felt enlightened. Yes, the establishment of the political department had nothing to do with them. As long as they performed well, there wouldn't be any problems. After all, the political department's minister was the sixth young master himself. Since that was the case, what else did they have to worry about? As the saying goes, if one's heart is clean, one's body is full of righteousness. They didn't rely on other methods to be promoted. In fact, as they became division commanders, the first step of promotion could only be decided by Yang Chendong. Since that was the case, what were they worried about? After thinking it through, Leng Song and Gao Xiong's faces were full of shame. "Sixth young master, we were wrong. Our thinking was too simple." Yang Chendong could tell that the two sincerely admitted their mistakes. He let out a long sigh and said, "Don't be afraid of making mistakes. Just don't make them again in the future. Since you know your mistakes, you have to contribute to the establishment of the political department. You have to help when you should. You're all division commanders. You have to show your magnanimity. Do you understand?" "Yes, yes." Leng Song and Gao Xiong kept nodding. These words made them understand Yang Chendong's painstaking efforts. Thinking about it, they had been thinking too much. With the sixth young master's influence and power, if he really didn't like them, would he still need to establish a political department to deal with them? He only needed to say a few words and give a few instructions. The knot in the hearts of the two division commanders was untied. As long as they didn't panic, they would even tell the other junior officers what he said. A truly knowledgeable person would know what to do. With the internal situation stabilized, Yang Chendong could finally rest assured. As for the establishment of the political department, not to mention that some of the officers were already showing signs of arrogance, even if they weren't, it would still be established. If the power wasn't distributed, it would be too centralized. Once there was a problem, it would be a headache to solve. Since that was the case, it was better to nip everything in the bud. With these words, plus the fact that he invited the two division commanders and their wives to the palace for the banquet tonight, there shouldn't be a problem in stabilizing the morale of the army. Once the army was stable, it would naturally be able to display its greatest strength in the war. This was also what Yang Chendong was concerned about. Sure enough, the next morning, after Leng Song and Gao Xiong went to the military headquarters and talked to some of the officers of the regiment, battalion, and even company level, the establishment of the political department was no longer hindered by anyone. On the contrary, There were many people who came to show their goodwill and help. This showed the new situation of the military and government being one family. In the blink of an eye, 3 days had passed. When the new morning arrived, Yang Chundong changed into the marshal's uniform. Under the reluctant gaze of the 3 wives, of course, the 3 wives were separated from their husbands on the bed. They couldn't get out of bed after a night of torment. They only wanted to satisfy Yang Chundong. They also wanted a child, so naturally they were willing to do so. Yang Chundong strode out of the palace. The first Shang dynasty was the first unified dynasty on Ryukyu Island. Its official name was the Shang dynasty. In order to distinguish it from the second Shang dynasty, it was usually called the first Shang dynasty. The first Shang dynasty had a total of 7 generations, from the first Shang Sea King to the last Shang De King. It was only established 63 years before it was destroyed due to internal strife. Yang Chundong's appearance added to this situation. Of course, he didn't feel the slightest bit of guilt towards the destruction of a country other than the foreign races. 3 years ago, when Yang Xie chose this place, it started the battle with the first Shang dynasty. In the beginning, they had a small territory and a small number of people. Now, they had a huge territory. The situation had completely reversed. The child that wasn't valued in the past had now grown into a colossal existence. In the end, it was going to open its bloody mouth and swallow up the last of the New North, reunifying this place. As if they had long sensed that the day of the final battle would come, the first Shang dynasty, whose sea passage had been sealed, began to display their potential to survive. Especially after the land in Taichung was occupied, they accumulated more strength to develop. A person's potential was always limitless. It was as if the greater the pressure, the greater the motivation. In less than 2 years, they had replicated close to 50 Xiangyang cannons. They either installed them on the ships or placed them in front of the docks. It was as if they were going to fight to the death. On land, not only did they replicate some of the lower-grade guns, they also dug countless trenches in the hundreds of acres of land that led to the New North from Taichung. These trenches were intertwined, and because of the terrain, there were high and low trenches. Soldiers armed with guns, bows and arrows, as well as swords and spears, were lying in ambush here. If the mercenaries really barged in and entered this chaotic trench, then the advanced firearms in their hands would be greatly suppressed. They would even have to choose to engage in close combat, and the losses would be immeasurable. There were more than 200 large and small warships waiting at the docks. On the shore, there were better protected cannons that could shoot for a mile as support. In addition, the entrance to Keelung port was originally a little narrow, making it easy to defend but hard to attack. On land, there were intertwined trenches that were like the blood vessels in the human body. It was like a natural moat that prevented the mercenaries from attacking from long range. At this moment, the first Shang dynasty was like a turtle, shrinking its body into a sturdy shell, giving off a feeling that it was impossible to bite and eat. Ever since Yang Chundong left the palace and met up with the army division commander Leng Song, the situation in this area had been continuously reported to him. Actually, this wasn't anything new. When he first came to Chichen City and understood the situation, he had already received the relevant reports. While he was sighing at the first Shang dynasty's defense, Yang Chundong was also thinking of a military attack strategy. All of this information made one feel that the docks should be easier to attack. After all, the Yang family navy's warships were equipped with long-range and highly destructive cannons. The furthest attack range could reach 20+ kilometers. It was much more advanced than the primitive Xiangyang cannons that could only shoot iron balls. Chapter 555. But the Navy was still the Navy. If it was a naval battle with the strength of the Yang family's navy, there was no need to be afraid of anyone. But this time, what they wanted to do was to occupy the dock and land, which was a lot more troublesome. Advanced artillery could allow the Navy to take down Keelung port, but in the end, they still had to land. The dock was originally a huge slope, which meant that the soldiers needed to attack it. This was equivalent to putting their bodies in the hands of the enemy. Maybe they could take it down, but they didn't know how much they would have to pay. In comparison, if the army could make a breakthrough, Then the Navy only needed to provide artillery support, which was much simpler. But what should they do when facing the countless trenches? On this issue, some officers put forward various ideas, especially the newly established staff department in the military. They proposed to flood the trenches. As long as a large amount of seawater was poured into the trenches, the enemy hiding here wouldn't come out and wouldn't retreat. In this way, the initiative of the war would naturally be in their hands. It had to be said that the idea was good, but it was too difficult to implement. First, they had to solve the problem of water. Although there was no shortage of water nearby, how could they draw the seawater into the trenches? It had to be known that the terrain here was high and low, and even if they could borrow the large water pump made by the munitions factory and the power plant to bring the seawater here, did they consider the amount of work? Besides, the enemy wouldn't just wait there and wait for you to flood them. Wouldn't they find a way to drain the water away? In the end, they really didn't know when to stop. Some also said that they could use grenades to open the way and blow up the trenches. This method was not feasible. First, they didn't know where the enemy was. If there were no enemies, wouldn't it be a waste of grenades to blow up the trenches? The number of grenades needed to cover a few hundred acres of land was too large. Second, if you just blew up a trench and thought it was safe, but the enemy moved here in time, wouldn't it be suicide to rush in without any preparation? So whether it was flooding or using grenades to open the way, they were all rejected. In the end, all eyes were on Yang Qindong. It seemed that in their eyes, there was nothing in the world that could make things difficult for the sixth young master. Facing the anticipation of the crowd, Yang Qindong displayed the bearing of a leader. His face was full of confidence, as if he was telling everyone that none of this was a problem. As for how he was going to solve it, he never said. Now that Yang Qindong had finally arrived at the front line and could already see the crisscrossing trenches in the distance, Leng Song and the other army officers once again placed their expectant gazes on Yang Qindong. Today's weather is good, very good. Yang Qindong didn't seem to notice that everyone was looking at him. Instead, he looked up at the sky and seemed to be in a good mood. Among the officers who didn't know why the sixth young master said this, some of the more impatient ones couldn't help but ask for a solution. But Yang Qindong's voice was a step ahead of the others. What's the rush? Didn't we agree that the attack will officially start at 9 o'clock? Just let the soldiers conserve their energy. After being pointed out by Yang Qindong, the officers really didn't know what to say. Some people couldn't help but look at their watches. It was not even 8:20 yet, which meant that they still had 40 minutes to prepare. That was equivalent to going down and watching how the sixth young master would create a miracle. Everyone was waiting. In the entire frontline command post, only the occasional ticking sound of the watch on each officer's wrist came from time to time. The silence lasted for more than 20 minutes until it was 8:50 a.m. Suddenly, there was a commotion among the soldiers of the various regiments and battalions. What's going on? As the commander of the 1st Division of the Army, and also the only division commander of the Army, seeing that the battle was imminent and the sixth young master was by his side, but the soldiers suddenly acted strangely, he was very dissatisfied. He was even more afraid that the sixth young master would blame him, so he immediately looked at the 2nd Regiment commander Luo Pa beside him. Luo Pa naturally understood the meaning behind it and hurriedly walked out of the frontline command post. But before he could ask the soldiers what was going on, he saw everyone's hand gestures. He couldn't help but look up at the sky. The scene that appeared in front of him gave him a big fright. In the originally clear blue sky, there were suddenly 20 large balloons flying in the air. Visible flames could be seen under the balloons as they slowly moved towards the battlefield. This is the Eagle Unit. Luo Pa was also one of the senior officers in the military, so he naturally knew of the existence of the Eagle Unit. He also knew that the training of this unit was very mysterious. Even he didn't know the details. The only thing he knew was that the military would provide a large amount of military pay to them every month. Considering that it was directly approved by the sixth young master, the officers below him didn't have any complaints. But they never thought that this unit would actually be an army, and that there would be 20 of them. When they appeared in the sky, they immediately gave people a feeling of the might of gods. People of that era, even if they were educated, Most of them would only know how to read and do accounting. Only a very small number of people would study ancient studies. These people could already be called great scholars, great scholars. But without exception, these scholars wouldn't study the matter of the birth of all things. In their view, it was just an unorthodox method, just a strange technique that couldn't be put on the table. It was under this kind of thinking that made them feel a sense of reverence towards the heaven and earth that they had never studied and understood. It was just like how the legends said that people could fly into the sky and travel through the earth. That was just a legend. It was something that only the mighty and immortals could do. It was impossible for humans to do it. Just as everyone thought so, the eagle unit appeared. Not only did they appear, but they also soared in the sky. Although the distance between them and the ground was less than 200 meters, this was already beyond the expectations of humans at that time. Some superstitious soldiers even began to put down the guns in their hands and kneel on the ground to worship. They couldn't be blamed for doing so. Decades of influence made it difficult for them to come into contact with such profound matters. Although those who could become the cold vanguard had a certain degree of cultural foundation, for most soldiers, it was limited to reading and reading maps. Sorry, they didn't have the time to learn anything more profound, and they couldn't learn it. Luo Po's knowledge was naturally different from ordinary soldiers. But even so, he was still shocked by the sudden appearance of the eagle unit in the sky, so much so that he forgot to report what he saw to his division commander. Only when the 3rd Regiment's commander Wuxia also walked out from the command center and stood beside him, similarly revealing an expression of disbelief as he looked at the sky, did Luo Po finally come back to his senses. Then, he pulled this former subordinate of his and strode back to the command center. Since the two commanders had both returned, Lung Song looked over with an inquiring look. Wuxia was still in shock and naturally couldn't answer. Luo Po's excitement and agitation had calmed down a lot. He could now use words to explain the reason. Reporting to Division Commander, the Eagle unit has appeared above our heads. They are hanging high in the sky, no different from gods. What? Upon hearing this answer, Lung Song's first thought was to ask if there was something wrong with his head. But considering that the 6th young master was right beside him, Luo Po shouldn't have said something like this without thinking. In the end, he didn't question him. Instead, he strode out of the command center and said, "I'll go take a look." The truth was the truth. It wouldn't disappear just because someone saw it. When Lung Song and the other officers returned to the command center, everyone looked at Yang Qindong with a lot more respect. They knew that the sudden appearance of this godlike air force was definitely the work of the 6th young master. In this world, he was probably the only one who could do this. As expected, Yang Qindong waited for everyone's attention to fall on him before finally speaking. "That's right, they are the Eagle unit. I call them the prototype of the Air Force. What do you think? Now that you have their cooperation, you only need to follow their commands in the air to know how many enemies are hiding in which trenches. At that time, you can freely choose whether to use grenades to blow them up or directly charge in to kill them." The more Yang Qindong spoke of it casually, the more the officers below were in awe of him. This was their 6th young master, the god of war in their army, the god in the hearts of the people. He was the only one who could always think of the simplest and most effective solution when faced with any problem. After that, it was time for the regimental and battalion officers to walk out of the command center. Yang Qindong also said that there were a total of 18 hot air balloons in the sky. This time, the main forces participating in the battle were 3 cold vanguard regiments and 3 auxiliary regiments. Each regiment had 3 battalions, which was a total of 18 battalions. In other words, each battalion could follow a hot air balloon and destroy the chaotic trenches of the 1st Shang Consortium under their command. Seeing that it was about 5 minutes to 9 a.m., all the regimental and battalion officers went down to the front lines to command the battle. When the news spread, all the soldiers knew that the hot air balloon above their heads was actually their ally, their comrade. Their morale skyrocketed, and the faces of the soldiers turned red as if they had been injected with some kind of hormone. In comparison, the 1st Shang Consortium soldiers who were hiding in the trenches like ostriches were dumbfounded. Chapter 556. The hot air balloons that suddenly appeared in the sky were quickly discovered by them. More and more soldiers knelt on the ground to worship them. It was rare for them to learn any culture, and this was the first time they saw the hot air balloons in action. It would be strange if they weren't afraid and nervous. After kneeling and praying, they heard the cheers coming from the army opposite them. They also saw the soldiers in the same mercenary uniform pointing at them from the hot air balloons in the sky. As long as one wasn't a fool, one would understand what was going on. This is actually an army sent by the mercenaries. Could it be that they have received the approval of the heavens and are here to destroy us? Even the heavens want to take care of them. How are we going to fight this battle? No matter where we hide, they will be able to see us clearly. Won't we still become their targets? The discussions of the soldiers grew louder and louder. It had already caused a huge impact, and the morale of the soldiers had also fallen to the lowest point. The generals of the First Shang dynasty also felt that it was inconceivable. They were also concerned about the morale of the soldiers. At that moment, they wanted to suppress the fear in their hearts. Someone suggested to use firearms to shoot down all the hot air balloons. As long as they succeeded, all the fear from before would disappear with the wind. However, even though their vision was clear, with the distance between the firearms and arrows, it was impossible for them to hit the hot air balloons in the sky. How could a firearm that only had an effective shooting range of 100 meters hit a hot air balloon that was 150 meters away? Not to mention that they were shooting towards the sky. This would shorten their shooting range even further. A series of gunshots rang out, and arrows flew through the air. However, in the end, there was no response at all. There was no response at all. The First Shang dynasty took the lead and fired the first shot. Following that, it was time for the mercenaries to retaliate. Under the command of the hot air balloons, the locations of the enemies and the number of enemies were all exposed clearly. If there were more enemies in a trench, they should throw grenades. If there were only 2 or 3 enemies in a trench, they could directly rush in and fight with bayonets. If there were trenches that were just for show, but in fact there were no enemies and they could be directly occupied, etc. The mercenaries were like tigers that had grown wings as they advanced step by step in an orderly manner. From time to time, there would be the sound of grenades and gunshots. Originally, he thought that with the protection of these trenches, even if he couldn't defeat the mercenaries, he could at least fight them to a standstill. But because of the sudden addition of the hot air balloons, everything they had prepared seemed so laughable. In just 3 hours, over 100 trenches were occupied and close to 10,000 Shang clan soldiers were killed or captured. This godlike speed of attack had completely messed up the Shang army's deployment. As they retreated again and again, the morale of the army was shaken. Some of the soldiers who didn't want to die began to retreat. They became deserters, throwing down their weapons and fleeing to the rear. Some even hung up white flags in the trenches and surrendered as captives. This was like a spreading plague, and the morale of the Shang clan army was slowly crumbling. Then, like a dam bursting, the morale of the Shang clan army became like a vast ocean. The defense of the trenches, which had been prepared for years, was broken in just 6 hours. Even Yang Chendong, who had been prepared for this, was surprised by this speed. Of course, Yang Chendong had neglected the reverence and fear people had for the heavens and earth. Actually, from the moment the hot air balloons appeared, the morale of the Shang clan army was already broken. It was only a matter of time before they lost. To be able to lose so quickly, it was mostly because they felt that the mercenaries were blessed by the heavens and earth. Then, wouldn't it be disrespectful to the heavens and earth to fight against them? The speed of the army's attack was so fast that it was beyond the imagination of both parties. Outside the Keelung port, the Navy also launched their attack at 9 a.m. The difference between the Navy and the Army was that under the command of Division Commander Gao Xiong, the Navy launched a merciless artillery attack. They didn't seem to have any intention of entering the port. When they were still 3 kilometers away, the cannons rained down on them as though they didn't cost anything. This greatly disappointed the Shang clan soldiers who were prepared to clash with the enemy. Among these 200-plus ships, there were some that were not bad. They weren't small and were worth quite a lot. To them, this was a bait. Whoever saw such a good ship wouldn't want to let it go easily and would want to use it for themselves. If they had such thoughts, they would have to engage in close combat. If that was the case, the Xiangyang cannons could be used to attack from a distance of 1 li away. Perhaps they might even be able to fight to a stalemate. But who would have thought that the enemy didn't have the slightest intention of taking advantage of them? Cannonballs fell like rain, smashing into the harbor and sinking countless ships. They also smashed into the harbor, sending the Xiangyang cannons standing there flying into the air. Don't be nervous. Don't be afraid. They will eventually come ashore. When that time comes, it will be time for us to retaliate. The Shang clan generals who were guarding the port still held onto a trace of hope. He believed that the mercenaries weren't here to destroy the ships but to occupy the port. Since they wanted to occupy the port, they had to launch a wave attack. As long as the army could make use of the crisscrossing trenches to block the mercenaries, they would have a chance to turn the tables. Unfortunately, this Shang clan general was destined to be disappointed, because the army that he had high hopes for had actually failed before them. Not only did 30,000 of the 50,000 soldiers surrender, thousands of them died in battle. The remaining 10,000 plus soldiers had already been lost in Sinzu, Ilan and other places and retreated back to the New North Prefecture. It seemed that only by returning to the high city with walls around them, they would be safer. By the time the news of the army's defeat reached the port, it was already noon of the second day. When the general who was guarding the port heard the news of the army's defeat despite the risk of being killed by the artillery shells, he let out a long sigh and led the soldiers who were hidden in various places to retreat back to New North City. At this point, in just 2 days, the Shang clan's external defenses had failed and they had all retreated back to the New North Prefecture. Because of this, their military strength had reached 80,000 men. By the time the army of mercenaries arrived at the New North Prefecture, they saw the tightly shut city gates of the 6 cities. Quickly surround this place. At the same time, clear out any hidden threats and enemies. Kill those who don't surrender. Leng Song, the commander of the 1st Division of the Leng Vanguard Army, gave the order and thousands of soldiers started to get busy. On the 4th day of the war, Jilung Port changed hands. After clearing out all the obstacles, the Navy's ships finally entered and aimed their cannons at the New North Prefecture. The range of the cannons here was enough to reach the New North Prefecture. On the 5th day of the war, Yang Chendong leisurely arrived at the New North Prefecture. Since there were 6 city gates here, it could be seen that this was a big city. He didn't want such a big city to be destroyed by artillery shells. Yang Chendong pointed forward and said majestically, "Department Head Yang, the rest is up to you." Department Head Yang Chendong, Yang Shan, was originally the assistant minister of the Ming Dynasty's Ministry of Rights. During the Tumu Castle incident, he was saved by Yang Chendong and followed Zhu Qizhen to Nanjing. After the Southern Ming Dynasty was established in Yingtian Prefecture, he was appointed as the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights. However, because he offended Minister Lu De, he had no choice but to go to Beiming and was saved by Yang Chendong. After being sent to Qiqian City, he was appointed as the Minister of Foreign Affairs with his own abilities. Yang Shan was good at arguing. Sending him to the 1st Shang clan to persuade them to surrender was the most appropriate choice. Ever since he came to Qiqian City, Yang Shan's horizons were broadened. Later on, because he was old friends with Yu Qian, he was recommended to be the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Yang Shan, who was ambitious and wanted to do great things, didn't have much of an idea after taking up the position. Qiqian City didn't even have a country. How could there be diplomacy? Although there were many countries that he dealt with on the sea, those people didn't even have the qualifications to come to the island. His position as a department head was just a facade. After waiting until now, he finally had a chance to perform properly. Furthermore, it was right under the nose of Yang Chendong. He knew that this 6th young master had a high status in Qiqian City. How could he not want to perform well? Yang Shan, who was called out, didn't even think twice. He didn't even consider whether his life would be in danger after entering the New North Prefecture. He straightened his clothes and strode towards the city gate with the 2 guards in charge of protecting him. Yang Shan revealed his identity when he reached the city gates. After waiting for about an incense's time, he entered the city on a basket placed down from the city gate tower. "Young master, can he do it?" Seeing Yang Shan and his 2 bodyguards enter the city, Tiger's Mane asked worriedly. "Whether it works or not, we still have to try." Yang Chundong chuckled, making it impossible for others to see what he was thinking. If it wasn't for the fact that he didn't want to destroy the new North Prefecture of the 6 Gates and the fact that most of the people in the city were descendants of the Han people, he wouldn't have to waste so much effort and could just attack the city directly. However, it would be best if they could achieve victory without the use of swords and spears. As for whether King Shangde would harm Yang Chundong still had some confidence. Unless their entire country was annihilated, it would be extremely daring of them to kill an envoy in such a situation. If they really had such guts, they wouldn't have stayed in the mercenary army's blockade for 3 years. They would have risked their lives to break out of the encirclement. Moreover, ever since Yang Shan entered the city, he had been walking with his head held high. Even though he was under the protection of the Shang clan soldiers, he didn't even frown. He had displayed the prestige of an envoy and didn't tarnish the reputation of the mercenaries. Chapter 557. Of course, it was because of his performance that the soldiers were even more fearful of him. When they thought about how the new North City was already surrounded, they didn't dare to underestimate this powerful military envoy. The first Shang dynasty had only been established for about 40 years and the palace still looked very majestic. Of course, for Yang Shan, who had served as an official of the Great Ming dynasty, he was still a little petty. Therefore, along the way he looked straight ahead, and his footsteps were steady, giving people a sense of confidence. Yang Shan was not the only one. Even the 2 Lung Feng beside him had sharp eyes. They were not affected by the environment at all and showed no signs of fear. In fact, these 2 men were also people who had been through a bloody battle. This time, they came with the mentality of win or die trying. They had already tied quite a number of explosives on their bodies. If things didn't go well, they would be able to detonate them with a pull. It was because of the strength of the 3 that the soldiers of the first Shang dynasty couldn't even search them. Using Yang Shan's words, what they did was an insult to the mercenaries. That was a heinous crime. Then, there was no need to talk and they should just fight. Compared to the upper echelons of the first Shang dynasty, the soldiers only wanted to live. In their eyes, even if they won the war and survived, it didn't mean that they were living a better life than others. After all, in this era, soldiers belonged to the lower class and were rarely looked up to. With such thoughts, they naturally hoped that they could resolve the crisis in front of them through negotiation. Not to mention, many of them had heard through various channels that the commoners who had joined the mercenaries were living a much better life than them. Each of them had their own fields or jobs, so their lives were worry-free and they could even save a lot of money. That was the life that they wanted to live. They successfully arrived at the main hall of the palace. At this moment, all the officials of the first Shang dynasty were gathered here. Even the king, Shangde, was sitting high up. When Shangde succeeded the throne, he was only 9 years old. Now, he was only 13 years old. Moreover, he had been besieged since 3 years ago. His territory had gradually shrunk, causing him to live in anxiety and apprehension every day. Looking from afar, although he was sitting high on the dragon throne, his face was pale and his condition was not good. Crimson City's foreign minister, Yang Shan, greets Your Majesty the King. When they were still a dozen or so meters away from the dragon throne, Yang Shan stood still and spoke. However, he didn't bend his body in any way to express his transcendent status. Yang Shan didn't bow. Many officials of the first Shang dynasty saw this, but they didn't express anything. Compared to such unnecessary etiquette, they valued their own rights more. What would happen if the battle continued? What would happen if he surrendered? When it came to patriotism, perhaps it was more of a matter for ordinary people. As people who benefited from it, of course, they would do whatever they could. Anyway, they wouldn't be able to become the king, so who would they keep their chastity for? All the officials didn't speak. Although the young king, Shangde, was unhappy, he didn't say anything about this matter. In comparison, he was also concerned about his own safety. After all, he was still a young man and he didn't want to die. Department head Yang, may I know what you have for me this time? Shang De personally went up to speak. Just from this point alone, it could be seen that the first Shang dynasty was already in a mess. Otherwise, there were some things that didn't require the king to personally go up to the front lines. Once he said something wrong, wouldn't there be no way to turn things around? Yang Shan saw everything. After being an official for dozens of years, although his other abilities weren't outstanding in terms of observation, he was much better than the officials from the Ministry of Rights. When he saw that it was the king of a country who went up to the front lines, he had a plan in his heart. When he spoke again, he was full of confidence. Your Majesty the King, this time, I am here to rescue all of you. Right now, the mercenary army is extremely powerful and the soldiers are all elite. Their morale is high and their weapons are advanced. They have already surrounded the new North Prefecture. If it wasn't for the fact that we are all from the same country, the cannons would have been fired and the city gates would have been blasted open. I am here to give all of you a chance to live. As long as all of you surrender and open the city gates, your safety will naturally be guaranteed. The king will have to abdicate, but other than losing his authority, he can still live a comfortable life. As for the rest of the officials, it will depend on each of your abilities. Of course, your lives will definitely not be in danger. Even your personal wealth will be protected to a certain extent. After Yang Chundong listed out all of his requests, a smart official immediately asked, "A certain extent of protection? Is there a proportion?" "Yes, at least half." Yang Shan replied without hesitation. "Half, only half." After the officials received this answer, they immediately began to discuss. "That's right, half is a little too little. We have lost too much." Needless to say, the people who made this kind of noise must be the misers group. They belonged to the type that cared more about money than their lives. The discussion below entered Yang Shan's ears, but he acted as if he didn't hear it. He first listened quietly. When these people were almost done talking, he coughed lightly and continued, "You haven't contacted the outside world for so long. I'm afraid you all still don't know what has happened, right? Speaking of which, ever since Yang Xia occupied Qichen City, he had completely sealed off the entire Ryukyu Island from the outside world. In total, it had been more than 3 years. These officials had indeed not received any news from the outside world for a long time. When Yang Shan said this, their interest was immediately piqued. Seeing that no one spoke, Yang Shan's eyes flashed with pride. He continued, "In the past 3 years, the powerful Great Ming dynasty has been divided into 3 factions. They are Bai Ming, Southern Ming, and Min King's faction. They are no longer as strong as before. On the contrary, the mercenary army's influence has been expanded and strengthened. Not long ago, the mercenary army sent troops to Jiaoji and destroyed the Jiaoji kingdom in a month. Of course, we have also negotiated with them before and promised them the same benefits as you all. It's a pity that some people didn't take advantage of it. As for the outcome," at this point, Yang Shan intentionally paused. This made the officials of the first Shang dynasty who were listening attentively anxious. Someone couldn't help but ask, "What happened? Could it be that they were all killed?" Amazing. This Mister's guess is extremely correct. When the negotiations failed, the mercenary army charged into the capital of Jiaoji. They killed their way into the big cities of Jiaoji. Those officials who didn't choose to surrender were all exterminated. Even the king of Jiaoji, Li Li, and the crown prince, Li Yuanlong, were faced with a situation where only one of them could survive. Later on, in front of many people, Li Li personally killed his only son, Li Yuanlong, in order to survive. Now, he is living out his remaining years in Qichen City. Although he lost his authority, his life was saved. It's a pretty good ending. What? Hearing Yang Shan say that Jiaoji was destroyed, all the officials were killed, and even the king of Lili had no choice but to kill his only son in order to survive. All the officials of the Shang dynasty who were present couldn't help but be shocked. The strength of Little Ryukyu Island was limited. It had faced various dangers in different eras. However, no matter what the outcome was, whether they were defeated or forced to surrender, as the officials of the country, they had no problem keeping their lives. After all, no matter who occupied this place, someone had to take care of it. As the natives of this place, no one knew the situation better than them, right? However, who would have thought that the mercenary army would really kill when they attacked? Even the king of Li, who was known to be vicious and merciless, didn't let him off. Didn't that mean that if they didn't surrender, only death would await them? The officials felt a chill in their hearts. Some of the smarter ones were already considering if they should choose to surrender. After all, they had already experienced the firepower of the mercenary army. Didn't they see how their impregnable defense was flattened in less than 2 days? They wouldn't be able to gain any advantage if they really fought with such an opponent. As the officials were calculating in their hearts, the young King Shangde was also calculating in his heart. He had to admit that when he heard that Li was willing to kill his only son in order to survive, he was really afraid. As the king of a country, Shangde had never truly enjoyed a day of happiness and high status since he took office. He was young to begin with, and his father had passed away in a hurry. He was the type of person who was appointed in the face of danger. This meant that everything had already begun before he was prepared. Even though he was still young, he had no choice but to think of ways to deal with internal affairs. However, before he could do anything, the mercenary army appeared. After that, they swept through the entire Shang dynasty in a domineering manner. The Shang dynasty was suppressed to a certain extent and lost its vitality. He had been in power for nearly 4 years, but he had actually spent all his time thinking about how to break through the blockade and kill his way out. However, this mission had never been accomplished. Now that someone had finally arrived at his doorstep, his choice had become inevitable. Speaking of which, Shangde didn't have much of a choice. He, who hadn't enjoyed much on the throne, had thought more than once that it would be great if he could be an ordinary person and live an ordinary life. Now the opportunity had appeared. As long as he nodded and opened the city gates of New North Prefecture, he would be able to step down from the throne and live an ordinary life. Chapter 558. In other words, he could bear the worst result. Therefore, he did not have any resistance to surrendering. However, he still could not stand Yang Shan's aggressiveness. Even if Yang Shan wanted them to surrender, shouldn't he at least have a good talk? Why did he have to be so aggressive right from the start? With a hint of anger, Shangde asked Yang Shan in a voice that was still young and hadn't reached puberty, "Emissary, what if we don't surrender? Have you thought about it? No matter if we live or die in the future, you, who appeared here, will definitely be the first to die. Aren't you afraid of death?" The young Shangde actually threatened Yang Shan. When the officials heard this, many of them panicked. They didn't want to die. If they really killed Yang Shan, it would be tantamount to forcing the mercenaries to become mortal enemies with them. If that was the case, no one present would have a good life. The officials were all panicking. They almost shouted out to stop their King Shangde. In reality, this kind of thing had been done many times in the past 4 years. For their own benefit, these officials had always been able to band together and force the young King Shangde to give in. This time, they were prepared to repeat the same story. But before these officials could speak, Yang Shan had already started laughing loudly. After a round of laughter, he suddenly pointed at the high and mighty King Shangde and said, "Of course, everyone is afraid of death. But if my death can cause so many to die with me, it will be worth it." Swoosh! Just as Yang Shan finished speaking, the 2 followers of Lung Feng behind him had already pulled off the buttons on their outer robes, revealing the densely packed detonators wrapped around their waists. What is that? The sudden change in the situation caused everyone to exclaim in surprise. Some of the more knowledgeable officials couldn't help but exclaim, "That looks like something made of gunpowder. You are indeed knowledgeable." Yang Shan nodded his head towards the minister, who spoke with a look of admiration. Then, he looked at the other ministers and introduced the item as if he was a salesman promoting his goods. "This item is called a detonator. It's a new explosive that our mercenary army has developed." After saying this, he raised his head to look at the palace. Then he nodded and muttered to himself, "If everything is normal, these detonators should be able to completely collapse this palace." Hearing that these lightning tubes were actually so powerful, all of the officials' faces changed. Although some of them didn't think that the power of this thing was as strong as Yang Shan said, they didn't dare to gamble. They were all standing here. If it really was as Yang Shan said, wouldn't it mean that their lives would be in danger? Your Majesty, we can't defeat the mercenaries. Let's just surrender. That's right, Your Majesty. A real man knows when to stretch and when to shrink. Let's lower our heads for now, and in the future. When the courtier reached this point, he couldn't even continue his lie. If the kingdom was destroyed, the king would be placed under house arrest. What future would there be? Many officials started to plead for leniency. Without exception, they all expressed the same attitude, which was that they absolutely could not become enemies with the mercenaries, and even more so, they could not harm Yang Shan. Some of the ministers who held military power had already thought it through. If the king insisted on doing things his way, they could only use their power to restrain him first. The high and mighty Shang De couldn't help but shake his head when he saw the reactions of the courtiers below. Although all of this was within his expectations, just like in the past 4 years, whenever there was a threat to their interests, these people would advise him with the big picture in mind. They were eating the salary of the kingdom and enjoying the benefits and power that came with being in a high position. However, when the king was in danger, none of them thought for the kingdom. Instead, they were still plotting their own schemes. Shang De was completely disappointed in them. Among these courtiers, there wasn't even one who was as fearless as Yang Shan. What future did a kingdom like this have? Even if there weren't any mercenaries, the kingdom wouldn't last long. Since that was the case, forget it. If they wanted to surrender, so be it. After all, he didn't want to be the king anymore. Under the pleading of the courtiers, Shang De finally made the decision to surrender. Then, they put down their weapons and opened the city gates. The mercenaries entered the city and took over. All the courtiers, including Shang De himself, were waiting in their own residences, waiting for their fate to judge them. Yang Shan completed his mission of persuasion and walked out of the New North Mansion in high spirits. Countless mercenaries and auxiliary soldiers entered the mansion in exchange for him. Not bad, well done. Yang Chendong patted Yang Shan's shoulder with a satisfied expression. Next, you will be in charge of taking over the courtiers here. Those who have committed heinous crimes must not be let off. As for those courtiers and merchants who still have a conscience, just confiscate half of their assets. Yes, Your Majesty knows what to do. Yang Shan nodded his head respectfully. If one wanted to be looked up to and respected by others, then one needed to display one's capabilities. This was a good opportunity to do so. After handing over the task to Yang Chendong, he walked towards the New North Prefecture under the protection and escort of the 1st and 2nd Guards. In his previous life, he had been here before. But at this moment, there weren't any tall buildings like in his previous life. Even the most prosperous streets of the New North Prefecture still gave off a filthy feeling. As he walked, he finally arrived at the palace and saw the last king of the Shang dynasty, Shang De. King Shang De, who had been waiting here for a long time, knelt on the ground when he saw Yang Chendong and the rest, looking very obedient. Yang Chendong's gaze landed on the 13-year-old Shang De and he sighed softly. Perhaps in the eyes of others, it was because of him that Shang De didn't have the chance to display his talents. But who knew that it was because of him that Shang De's fate changed? At least it wouldn't be like his previous life, where the first Shang dynasty fell apart due to the chaos in the court and Shang De was killed by his courtiers. Because of Yang Chendong, as long as Shang De was obedient, he should be able to have a good ending. The Prince of Sin, Shang De, greets the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. Shang De knelt on the ground and shouted. Obviously, someone had already told him about Yang Chendong's identity. Get up, Yang Chendong said as he extended his hand to help Shang De up. It could be seen that Yang Chendong was still very courteous to the Shang dynasty. At least, the courtiers who surrendered would not have the honor of having Yang Chendong personally help them up. Thank you, Duke of Loyalty and Courage. Shang De may be young, but he had learned this set of etiquette since young and was naturally very familiar with it. Shang De stood up, and Yang Chendong patted him on the shoulder. Don't think too much about it. The burden that history has placed on you is too heavy. You've also worked hard. Although the results may not be satisfactory, it's not your fault. Next, I will arrange for someone to send you to Chichen City. Your courtyard has already been built, you can live there in the future. For some reason, after hearing Yang Qindong's words, Shangda's eyes were filled with tears. At this moment, he suddenly felt that this Duke of Loyalty and Courage understood him well. Shangda knew how heavy his burden was. In the past 4 years, he had not had a good night's sleep. Now that everything had been settled, he could finally have a good night's sleep. Thinking about it, that feeling should be very good. Following the takeover of the new North Prefecture, it represented the destruction of the first Shang dynasty. After the news reached Chichen City, Lord Yuqian, who had already prepared his men, waved his hand and 30,000 educated youths from Chichen City entered Ilan, Taoyuan, New North, Keelung and other places under the protection of 30,000 temporary auxiliary soldiers. Presumably, it would not be long before these places were completely transformed. A new city that was different from this era would quickly rise from the ground. In a small town outside of Luang Prabang City, one of the territories of the Lansong Kingdom. For the past few days, the atmosphere here was extremely tense. Those who appeared in this area had to go through strict checks before they were allowed to enter and leave. This had disrupted the lives of the people here. However, because this area was under the control of the military, the news could not be spread out. And in this unknown small town, no one knew that the Lansong Kingdom's king, Payasai, was meeting with the Jiaoxi's general, Fan Yuhai. Back then, Fan Yuhai had defended Shiyu City and fought a decisive battle with the mercenaries. After his defeat, he did not enter the city immediately. Instead, he led 20,000 elite soldiers and fled the city, becoming the strongest military force of the Jiaoxi kingdom. As a general of Jiaoxi that had been destroyed, Fan Yuhai still had some capabilities. In the past month, he had actually gathered 60,000 deserters from Jiaoxi. Together with his 20,000 elite soldiers, he had a total of 80,000 men. With such strength, he finally had the qualifications to meet with the Lansong Kingdom's king and discuss the matter of cooperation. In the largest inn in the town, the two sides met. Fan Yuhai first explained the current situation to him. Your Majesty, everyone knows that the mercenaries are as scheming as Sima Zhao. Destroying Jiaoxi is just their first step. They will not be satisfied. Furthermore, you had previously sent reinforcements to Jiaoxi. At that time, you had already formed a grudge. I believe that not long after, once they have completely destroyed Jiaoxi, they will raise their butcher's knife and come for you. However, I wonder if your Majesty has any countermeasures at that time? The moment both parties sat down, Fan Yuhai exaggerated the threat of the mercenaries to force the other party to make a decision and declare war on the mercenaries. Since Payasai was able to become the king, he was naturally not scared. He looked at Fan Yuhai with an unhappy expression. Don't be alarmist. Just tell me what your plan is and how confident you are. Chapter 559. All right. Fan Yuhai nodded. He had no choice but to bring out something useful at this moment. He took out a military map that belonged to the Jiaoxi kingdom and said, Your Majesty, the mercenaries seem to be in control of the situation in Jiaoxi, but in reality, they don't have a stable footing. Many of the prefectures only submit on the surface. Due to the limited number of mercenaries, the ones managing them are mostly the Jiaoxi mercenaries led by Hong Jin. These people basically don't have much combat strength. As long as our army arrives, it'll be easy for them to open the gates and surrender. I'm 90% confident in this. Fan Yuhai paused for a moment. When he saw Payasai nodding in satisfaction, he continued, With this, we can conquer most of Jiaoxi without shedding a single drop of blood. The only troublesome places are the capital, Hanoi City, and Shiyu City. However, there aren't many mercenaries stationed here. I've already sent people to investigate. There are only 30 cold fronters, 800 auxiliary soldiers, and less than 2,000 temporary auxiliary soldiers. As long as we use the right method, the probability of eliminating them is at least 80%. The right method? What kind of method? King Payasai asked curiously. Your Majesty, you should know that Hanoi City is currently selling all kinds of goods through trade, right? Then, as long as we dress up as a group of merchants and enter Hanoi Prefecture first, we can take them by surprise and kill them. How can a mere 2,000 mercenaries be a match for us? When that happens, not only can we eliminate them, we can also obtain the most advanced firearms in their hands. After studying them, why can't we have an elite army with advanced firearms? If he could master these guns, he would have the ability to face the mercenary army head-on. Not to mention, we also have other methods to prevent them from attacking us. Seeing how confident Fan Yuhai was, Payasai was tempted. What other methods are there? Your Majesty, when the mercenaries first entered Jiaoji, they tried to confuse us with negotiations. For that, we paid the price of 20,000 Han civilians and delayed the war by 10 days. I have never understood this matter. Could it be that the mercenaries really care about the lives of the Han people? In fact, when I sent someone to investigate, the news that came back confirmed my thoughts. In every city of Jiaoji that was conquered, the status of the Han people there became much higher. Is there such a thing? It was the first time Payasai had heard of this. Of course, this did not mean that their intelligence agencies were blind and deaf. It was just that, in that era, the people in power valued their own interests more. How many people took the common people seriously? If they didn't pay attention to it, naturally, even if there was such information, it would be automatically blocked by their subordinates. Is this true? Fan Yuhai nodded heavily before revealing a strange smile. Your Majesty, think about it. If we take down Jiaoji first and control the Han people there, when the main force of the mercenaries arrives, we push these Han people out. At that time, what will the mercenaries choose to do? Those are the people they painstakingly saved. Are they going to kill 100 of them just like that? They will feel heartache. But if they don't kill them, the initiative of the war will fall into our hands. When that time comes, the entire Jiaoji will become one of the territories of the Lansong Kingdom. You, the great King Payasai, will become the most dazzling person and forever be recorded in the annals of history. Fan Yuhai's words were extremely bewitching. At this moment, King Payasai couldn't help but nod his head. The Lansong Kingdom's territory was too small. Even though Payasai believed that he wouldn't lose to anyone in terms of ruling a country, he was ultimately unable to expand because of the territory. Now that Jiaoji had become an ownerless object, it would belong to whoever took it. Why didn't he have the right to take it by force? While Payasai was still weighing the benefits in his heart, Fan Yuhai, who was sitting opposite him, opened his mouth again. Your Majesty, there are countless businesses and gold and silver in Hanoi City. Those are all very compact goods. They belong to the kind that is priceless. There was even a Yang family bank established there. It was said that there was a mountain of gold and silver in there. If one could occupy that place, one would be able to gain a lot of wealth. With money, one would be able to recruit soldiers and buy horses. After becoming strong, it would not be impossible for one to send troops to the Ming dynasty. There is a good saying among the Han people. It is better to have the guts than to be a king. And hearing this, Payasai's eyes lit up. What Fan Yuhai said was indeed a dream of his. The reason why the Ming dynasty was strong was not because their military was strong, nor was it because their governance was good. It was nothing more than occupying a large territory. Payasai had even thought more than once that if he was the emperor there, he would definitely do better than the Ming dynasty emperor. All he lacked was an opportunity to show his talent. But now, after hearing what Fan Yuhai said, it seemed that his great dream could be realized. How could it not make Payasai restless? Previously, his general, Seihai, came to report that His Majesty the King would finally meet Fan Yuhai. He did not take it seriously. But this time, after thinking about it, he came to see him. After meeting him, he found that this person was really a great talent. At least, he had a much better vision than the generals in his country. Thinking that Fan Yuhai was a famous general, he could not help but want to recruit him. General Fan, I wonder if you can come to my Lansong Kingdom. You can rest assured that once you come here, I will give you the position of general. The soldiers of the entire Lansang kingdom will be at your disposal. How about it? Piasai cherished talent and wanted to recruit Fan Yuhai. He even did not hesitate to entrust him with important tasks. In his opinion, his power and Fan Yuhai's talent were the best combination. Thank you, Your Majesty the King. In the face of Piasai's recruitment, Fan Yuhai accepted with a smile. Then, there was a burst of laughter in the room. Then, the two sides carried out in-depth discussions on specific plans. For example, the matter of attacking Hanoi City first, how to use the terrain to defeat the mercenaries during the attack, the formation of the inspection team, the forging of iron shields, and so on. In a word, they had to use up all the bullets of the mercenaries. Piasai left with a satisfied face. The two sides agreed to take action after a month. The reason why they chose this time was because they needed to constantly send spies to Hanoi City to cooperate with the mercenaries. And this required time to operate. In the room, a black shadow walked out from the dark. This person was not tall and had a very ordinary appearance. However, his eyes flashed with light, giving people a very dangerous feeling. General, why did you agree to join the Lansang kingdom? As soon as this person appeared, he revealed a trace of murderous intent. Even when he looked at Fan Yuhai, his eyes were also in a state of interrogation. Sigh. Fan Yuhai sighed, knowing that he had been misunderstood. He hurriedly explained, Brother Min, you've misunderstood. Why would I want to join the Lansang kingdom? Isn't this to reduce the other party's vigilance? You know that I have received the favor of King Li Li. Even if I die, I will be a citizen of Jiaoxi. This will not change. The person called Brother Min was full name Li Min. He was the adopted son of King Li Li of Jiaoxi. It was said that he was picked up from the deep mountains and forests when he was hunting. This person had been with beasts since young. When he was first seen, he was still drinking wolf milk. Such a person with a wild heart was given special training after being adopted by Li Li. He was very powerful. A while ago, he went out to find the elixir of immortality for Li Li. That was how he escaped the attack of the mercenaries. After receiving the news and returning, he could not find his adoptive father. Li Min found Fan Yuhai to seek a way to restore the kingdom. The difference between Li Min and Fan Yuhai was that Li Min didn't want to defeat the mercenaries. It was too difficult for him to complete this mission alone. His goal was to find the whereabouts of his adoptive father and save him. Fan Yuhai, who knew Li Min's ability, agreed to this request in order to use him. He also said that he would find a suitable opportunity to make a move. As long as he could capture the Ming dynasty's Duke of Loyalty, Yang Qindong, there would be a great chance to exchange for King Li Li. Because of this, Li Min agreed to follow Fan Yuhai. He was the one who heard the conversation with Piasai. He said that he wanted to join the Lansang kingdom. He did not hide it anymore and came out to question. Fan Yuhai's answer temporarily dispelled Li Min's worries. He did not care about this matter anymore and took the initiative to talk about other things. Bai Ming's special envoy is here. Do you want to meet him? Of course, I want to meet him. Fan Yuhai did not care which faction came. As long as he could help him, it was fine. In the backyard, a man in cotton clothes was standing under a tree. He looked up at the sky as if there was a beautiful scenery in front of him. As someone who was chosen by Jining and sent here to carry out the assassination mission, he needed to be very vigilant at all times. Therefore, when he heard the sound of footsteps behind him, he suddenly flew up. A long sword had appeared in his right hand at some unknown time, and he was already holding it against Fan Yuhai's throat, who had just entered the courtyard. What do you mean by this? Even with the sword on his neck, Fan Yuhai's expression did not change at all. It was not because of anything else, but because Li Min was standing beside him. Nothing. I just want to test your strength. Just as the man finished speaking, a white light suddenly flashed. It was so fast that he did not even have time to react. His right hand that was holding the sword hurt, and then the long sword fell to the ground. Chapter 560. Needless to say, it was Li Min who attacked. After he swung his sword, He solved the crisis and even injured the Biming envoy. Then he said coldly, "You want to test other people's strength with just this little bit of skill? Save it." Okay. The Biming envoy who retreated didn't even look at the sword that fell to the ground. Instead, he focused on Li Min. He was indeed a little careless just now. He thought that he didn't need to use all his strength to deal with a defeated general who ran away. But now, it seemed that the other party was indeed capable since he could escape from the mercenaries. "Very good, you've successfully angered me. I hope you can perform as well as you did just now." The Northern Ming envoy's gaze became much more solemn. A wave of killing intent even uncontrollably exuded from his body, crazily sweeping out like a whirlwind with him as the center. This was a strong murderous aura that could only be produced after killing a lot of people. If it was an ordinary person, just this murderous aura alone would make them tremble and lose their morale. Unfortunately, Fan Yuhai had led troops for many years and killed countless people on the battlefield. Naturally, murderous aura was useless against him. As for Li Min, he had been with beasts since he was very young and was used to life and death. This murderous aura didn't affect him much. After releasing his murderous aura, the Biming envoy suddenly had a long sword in his hand. This was why he was so powerful. He had a total of 13 swords on his body. Therefore, the people in Jianghu gave him the nickname of 13 Swords. With a sword in hand, the Biming envoy rushed toward Li Min with a heroic spirit. Compared to intimidating Fan Yuhai, he preferred this powerful and cold murderous aura that gave him the same feeling. Ding ding dang dang. The saber and the sword kept colliding in the small courtyard, creating a series of noises. The noises attracted the attention of Fan Yuhai's personal guards. A group of 100 people quickly surrounded the small courtyard and pointed their spears at the two people in the courtyard. Regardless of whether it was Li Min, who had been hiding in the dark, or the Northern Ming special envoy, who had good swordsmanship and a murderous aura, these personal guards did not recognize them. Their duty was to protect the general's safety, and they would definitely not allow anyone to threaten Fan Yuhai. With the appearance of the personal guard, Fan Yuhai's face flashed with an unknown smile. He had an idea in his heart. He wanted to test the weight of these two people because he already had a good plan in his heart. Whether or not it would succeed would depend on the ability of the executor. Surround them to say, capture them. After spitting out a few simple words, the 100 personal guards had already picked out 6 10-man teams and rushed towards the two top-notch assassins. It was a fair fight for one person to face to kill, to kill. The two of them who were in the middle of a fight were suddenly interrupted. Naturally, their expressions didn't look too good. To say, Li face to say, and the guards to say, to kill to say, he to say, to win to kill to the guards to say, he was to say, to kill the closest to him. To say, he to say, to kill to say, to say it to say, to on to say. To be able to become a top assassin, his IQ was naturally very high. Li Min could tell that Fan Yuhai wanted to test his skills. Since that was the case, he wouldn't be polite. As long as he didn't kill his opponent, even if he severely injured his opponent, it was completely within the boundaries. After all, swords and spears had no eyes, so it was reasonable to injure his opponent. The Biming envoy was also very angry. Although he had already used his 7th sword, which proved that he was not Li Min's opponent, it was not easy for him to find such a strong opponent. However, for an expert like him, it was not easy to find a strong opponent. He was looking for his own shortcomings through this fight, but now he was interrupted by someone. It was impossible to say that he was not angry at all. Since the guard's appearance made him unhappy, he certainly wouldn't show mercy. Of course, he wouldn't forget his mission, so he only injured the guards and didn't have the intention to kill. Fortunately, both of them didn't have the intention to kill. Otherwise, Fan Yuhai's 100 guards would soon be replaced. And even if they didn't have the intention to kill, at least half of the guards would have to be replaced. This was because many of the injured guards were saved, but because of their injuries, it would be difficult for them to recover to their original peak state. Naturally, since they were able to survive and continue to be the guards, their strength would also rise to a higher level because of this fight. A real assassin was particular about suddenly appearing, then striking with his sword, seizing the head of his opponent and leaving gracefully. Therefore, when facing an organized army, it was difficult for them to show their strong ability. From this point of view, regardless of whether it was Li Min or the Northern Ming Special Envoy, both of them were somewhat unqualified. They were actually able to remain extremely calm, and their attacks were as fast as lightning. Often, after a blade or sword slashed out, a personal guard would be struck and fall to the ground. It was precisely because of their strong ability that Fan Yuhai's eyes lit up. Weren't they the people he was looking for? The Duke of Loyalty of the Great Ming Dynasty was often protected by an organized army. It was naturally difficult for ordinary assassins to get close to him. What he needed was an expert who could kill 100 or 1,000 people. Regardless of whether it was Li Min or the Baiming envoy, both of them seemed to meet this requirement. How could he not be happy? That's right, Fan Yuhai had the idea of assassinating Yang Qindong. The mercenaries were too strong. Not only did they have the world's most advanced firearms, but they also had cannons that had a destructive power that was as powerful as thunder. These were not things that they could resist. It was too difficult to defeat the mercenaries in a direct confrontation. In comparison, it was a good choice to capture the leader first. If he could capture or kill the Duke of Loyalty of the Great Ming Dynasty, it would be the best time to disintegrate them when they were without a leader. At that time, when the mercenaries' morale was in chaos, he could use some methods to suppress some and rope in some. How could he not accomplish his goal of restoring Jiaoji? He could even obtain those advanced weapons. Jiaoji would definitely be stronger than before. It should be said that this was Fan Yuhai's goal. The so-called seeking refuge with the Lansong Kingdom was just for the sake of Ampiasai. After all, it was very difficult for him to severely injure the mercenaries with his current strength. Since that was the case, it was necessary to find suitable helpers. In his eyes, there were fewer and fewer of the 100 personal guards who were still standing on the battlefield. Although they were also veterans, they were more particular about teamwork. When their teammates were injured one after another, there was no one to cooperate with them. In a one-on-one battle, they were unable to effectively display their abilities and were defeated one by one. In the end, there were less than 10 of them who were still standing on the battlefield. Enough! Fan Yuhai, who didn't wish for the entire army to be wiped out and didn't wish to replace all of his personal guards, finally spoke up, following which, he invited Li Min and the Northern Ming envoy to the final room in the courtyard. From this point of view, he had already acknowledged the strength of these two people. In this dimly lit room, Fan Yuhai took the initiative to pour tea for the two murderous men who were still out of breath. When he sat down again, his voice had already regained its calmness. Northern Ming's special envoy, right? Tell me, what do you need us to do? What kind of help can you provide us? The Baiming envoy was a straightforward person. After the test, he didn't seem to want to waste any more time. He raised his head and looked into Fan Yuhai's eyes. He said very generously, "We will provide you with everything you need. We only have one goal, which is to kill the Great Ming Dynasty's Duke of Loyalty." This kind of request was exactly what Fan Yuhai wanted. Fan Yuhai could not help but feel happy, but he did not show it on his face. He first looked at Li Min. This person naturally wanted to save King Lily, so he nodded in agreement. Fan Yuhai then looked at the Baiming envoy again. "But how should I address you?" "Shin Kuan." "Brother Shin, this matter is very important. We need to plan it carefully. Do you have a specific plan?" Fan Yuhai asked in a consulting tone. "The plan is up to you. You just need to give me a suitable opportunity to send me to the Duke of Loyalty. With my methods, you should believe that no one can stop me in close combat," Shin Kuan said very heroically and confidently, as if he was the most arrogant person in the world. Unfortunately, just as he finished speaking, Li Min's voice sounded. "I don't think highly of your strength. HM?" Hearing someone doubt him, even if this person was Li Min, who was stronger than him, Shin Kuan's eyes still revealed a very angry expression. Li Min was unmoved, but what she said next made Shin Kuan's expression soften. He even had to nod in agreement. "I don't think highly of your individual strength, but if you can cooperate with me, I think it will be foolproof. Okay, I agree. We can work together, Shen Kuan said decisively. For a moment, the three of them couldn't help but laugh loudly. It was as if Yang Chundong only had half his life left and could be taken away by them at any time. Yang Chundong didn't know everything that happened in this remote town. Although the security bureau was established, it was impossible for them to know everything in the world. They only paid attention to the actions of some big cities and important people. But this time, Piasai's actions were very mysterious and successfully avoided the security bureau's tracking. He didn't know that someone wanted to assassinate him. Of course, even if he knew, Yang Chundong wouldn't be afraid. Not only did he have the first and second guard teams, but his own strength had also increased greatly. Especially after having sex with Hu Yen and the other girls, his body's flexibility and strength were at least 50% better than when he was at his peak in the previous world. Chapter 561. He couldn't understand how his body could be developed to such an extent and could only attribute it to the benefits of transmigrating. While his own strength was increasing, after he took down the number 1 Shang clan, he returned to Crimson City and walked around the various factories. While he was inspecting, he was also using his warehouse to create miracles. Since he had already become a legend and the commoners already had the impression that he was a god, Yang Chundong didn't mind doing more exciting things. For example, after he dismissed everyone at the power plant, Luan Qi and the rest discovered all sorts of never-before-seen generators the next morning. For example, after spending a night at the steel factory, after spending a night at the military factory, after spending a night at the factory, after spending a night there, Luan Qi and the rest discovered various armored vehicles and 63 amphibious tanks. Everyone was dumbfounded by the miracles created by Yang Chundong. Often after seeing these things, their first feeling was to kneel on the ground and shout that the gods had shown their spirit. However, no one asked Yang Chundong what was going on. This was a question that couldn't be answered. Fortunately, under the feudal society, people's thoughts were too restricted. Few people would ask why when something happened. Furthermore, these miraculous things were only known to a few higher-ups in the various factories, and their influence was still very limited. Moreover, these people were usually immersed in the process of research and learning, so no one would find trouble with Yang Chundong. He stayed in Crimson City for 2 months and spent the new year of 1452 with Hu Yen and the other 2 girls in the palace. The fireworks and firecrackers in the Crimson City Plaza attracted the attention of millions of people outside the city. The current population of Crimson City was already saturated. Out of the 4.5 million commoners from the Southern Ming Dynasty, 500,000 of them had already entered the various factories in the city after being selected and vetted. The rest had either been arranged into various training schools or allocated to a sizable amount of land. Each and every one of them was living a wonderful life of hope that they had never imagined before. It was also on this night that Yang Chundong and the 3 girls slept together. Only when the sun was about to rise did the 6th young master let the 3 women go, full of vigor. Hu Yen and the others naturally lay on the bed, unwilling to move. At this moment, they began to think about the idea that they had been thinking about before. They should find a few more sisters, otherwise, they would die of exhaustion on this matter sooner or later. After New Year's Day, Crimson City showed a flourishing state of development. With sufficient manpower, the factories went all out. Whether it was quantity or quality, there was a certain increase. With Yang Chundong's help, there were many new things. Gold and silver flowed like water into the Red Nest City's warehouse. Yu Qian was so happy that his face turned red. Tian Tian was as sweet as honey. Although he didn't care about money or grain when he was in the Great Ming Dynasty, he still roughly knew how much money there was in the national treasury. How could there be such a rich and abundant city like Crimson City? With money, it was naturally easier to do things. Yu Qian felt that he could speak with more confidence, and his back was stiffer. Everything was on the right track. More and more Han people were beginning to adapt to life here. More and more educated youths were learning and becoming stronger every day. Just as another wave of people was about to join the army, Yang Chundong led the 2nd and 3rd regiments of the Cold Front Army, as well as the 20 auxiliary battalions, and left the island. The new year was coming, and he was about to embark on another expedition. Vietnam, Hanoi City, the former capital of Jiaoji. At this moment, it was shrouded in dark clouds. In 2 months, Fan Yuhai and the Lansong Kingdom had made all the preparations. When the last caravan entered Hanoi City, the total number of soldiers hidden in the city had reached 5,000. In fact, there were only about 2,000 mercenaries in the city, plus about 10,000 Jiaoji mercenaries. However, the entire population of Hanoi City was over 200,000. In comparison, a ratio of 20-1 was more than enough. However, under the enemy's preparations, this number was obviously not enough. At least, it gave Fan Yuhai and the general of the Lansong Kingdom, Sai Shi, such a feeling. Sai Shi was one of the most powerful generals in the Lansong Kingdom. Most of the soldiers under him were from the Dragon tribe. This time, under the king's orders, he brought 50,000 men to deal a fatal blow to Hanoi City. Long before they had made their move on Hanoi City, they had already taken down the important city of Go Chi City in the northwest of Vietnam. There were only 500 Vietnamese mercenaries defending it, and it wasn't even an effective defense. Thus, it was easily taken down by Fan Yuhai and Sisi. Of course, this was also because Vietnam had just been established, and the centralization of power was not yet complete. After taking down Go Chi City, General Sai Shi led the 70,000 soldiers towards Hanoi City. Fan Yuhai brought the remaining 60,000 soldiers to attack the other cities in Vietnam. From this point, it could be seen that he had big plans. Furthermore, he intended to hand over Hanoi City to the Lansong Kingdom, which showed his high intelligence. Sai Shi could also feel that Fan Yuhai was a little clever. However, the temptation of Hanoi City was too great. Thinking about the mountain of goods in the commercial street, and the Yang family bank, who knew how much gold and silver were stored there. If he could take over Hanoi City, the Lansong Kingdom would have more capital to develop. With such an excited thought, Sai Shi led his men to surround Hanoi City. Then, he prepared to knock on the city's west gate with his spies that night. Song Zhe was the person in charge of Vietnam that Yang Qindong had left behind. Recently, he was so busy that he could only sleep for 4 to 6 hours at night. However, he really liked this kind of work pressure. Just like what the 6th young master always said, if you don't work hard when you are young, if you don't fight hard, do you have to wait until you are old to regret it? Now that he had such a direction to strive for, of course, he wanted to put on a show for others to see. In addition to being able to prove his value, he believed that if he did things well, the 6th young master would definitely take note of it. In the future, there would definitely be a higher position waiting for him in the entire Yang family. Although the work was busy, after more than 2 months of tempering, many things had begun to gradually get on the right track. He had a better understanding of the situation here, and when he did things, it was much easier. Reporting to the governor, the security bureau's Gao Yu requests an audience. A person in charge of his safety said outside the office. Song Zhe, who had been appointed as the governor of Vietnam, suddenly heard that someone from the security bureau had come. He couldn't help but frown. His intuition told him that when these people appeared, it would not be good news. But he still nodded and said, "Invite Leader Gao in." Gao Yu, one of the elite agents of the security bureau, was also a person that the current deputy director, Yang San, valued very much. This time, he was sent to Vietnam to be in charge of the intelligence work here. Gao Yu strode into the office and gave Song Zhe a military salute. Although the two sides did not have a direct relationship, as the person in charge of Vietnam appointed by the 6th young master, he must give the corresponding respect. "You don't have to be so polite, Director Gao. Please take a seat." Song Zhe also returned the salute and said politely with a smile. Gao Yu, on the other hand, did not have the slightest smile on his face. Instead, he answered very seriously, "Governor Song, we have lost contact with Go Yong City." Go Yong City? Hearing this, Song Zhe's face flashed with surprise. He was very clear about the situation in Vietnam during this period of time. He was very familiar with the location of the city and what kind of role it played. However, out of caution, he still asked again, "Did something happen to your people that caused you to be unable to contact them in time?" The transportation in ancient times was not good, so there would be some problems with the transmission of information. It was very normal to be late for a few days. It was no wonder that Songja thought in this direction. Gao Yu, on the other hand, shook his head with certainty. That won't happen. When we send messages, we use 2 people and 2 lines. They don't overlap. Even if something happens to one of them, the other will definitely bring the news over. But now it is the designated time and there is still no news. I suspect. When Gao Yu said the words, "I suspect," his expression was obviously more serious. However, he paused for less than 2 seconds before he resolutely said his guess. "I suspect that either something happened to them, or Goyong City has gone out of control and they can't leave the city." Out of control? Can't leave the city? This conclusion was a little scary, and even Songja had to treat it with caution. "Are you sure, Leader Gao? You should know the possible consequences of this conclusion." "I'm sure." Gao Yu's answer was very straightforward. In fact, he dared to say this because he had already waited for an extra day. In other words, after 24 hours, there was still no news about Goyong City. That was why he came to look for Songja. According to the internal regulations of the Security Bureau, he had already gone a little overboard. However, there was no other way. This matter involved too many people, so he had to be very careful. That was why he had waited for an extra day. Hearing Gao Yu's affirmation, Songja's expression turned even uglier. He strode over to the map of Vietnam hanging on the wall. His gaze paused on Goming City for a moment before he punched it. Do they really have the guts to do this? Needless to say, Gao Yu, who was standing behind him, naturally knew who he was referring to. This result was exactly the same as his previous analysis. He was also somewhat unable to accept it, but what was coming was unavoidable. Chapter 562. Bang, bang, bang. While Gao Yu was still accepting this fact in his heart, a few gunshots suddenly rang out in the dark night outside. What's going on? Songja and Gao Yu shouted at the same time. Governor, the gunshots are coming from the west gate. It seems like it's coming from the city. Lung Feng, who was guarding the door, had good eyesight. When the gunshots were heard, he ran out to the street and found the source of the gunshots with his keen eyesight and judgment. The gunshots were getting louder and louder, showing no signs of slowing down. Songja and Gao Yu looked at each other and knew that the worst situation had come. Leader Gao, judging from the gunshots, there are a lot of enemies. We need to prepare for the worst. Songja quickly calmed down. There was nothing to be afraid of. I understand. I will immediately bring the radio box here and contact the outside. How could Gao Yu not know how critical the situation was right now? Since the enemy had chosen to make a move on their mercenaries, the other 3 city gates must have been sealed off as well. It would be impossible to rely on people to ask for help from outside. Thank you, Leader Gao. Songja nodded seriously. Only a few people knew about the existence of a radio station in Hanoi City. It was one of the secret weapons that Yang Chendong had prepared for them before he left. Because there was no electricity in the city, in order to prevent the radio from running out of battery, Yang Chendong had specifically ordered that it should not be used unless it was a major incident. Even if they wanted to use it, they needed to get the approval of both the governor and the Security Bureau. It seemed that now was the critical moment to use it. Gao Yu turned and left the office. Songja hesitated for a moment and then said to Lung Feng, Go and get Platoon Leader Liu and General Hong Jin. Not long after, the platoon leader of the Lung Feng platoon, Liu Jian, and the Vietnamese mercenary general, Hong Jin, appeared in the governor's office. When they arrived, they saw Songja and another man busily working on something. Knowing that the two had arrived, Songja walked out of the office and looked at Hong Jin. What's the situation outside? Reporting to Governor Song, after the west gate was breached, the south gate was also lost. Our troops are currently fighting with the enemy while retreating into the city. There are too many enemies and it's dark. We're not prepared. Hong Jin lowered his head as he spoke, his face full of guilt. Of the 3 generals of the Vietnamese mercenaries, Ruan Chunchang and Chen Di were not in the city, so he was in charge of commanding the Vietnamese mercenaries. Under his efforts, The 4 city gates that were originally guarded by the auxiliary barracks were now handed over to them. This trust made him extremely touched. Just as he was thinking of performing well, who would have thought that the enemy would suddenly appear? In addition, there were actually traitors among his soldiers. This caught him off guard and caused him to lose 2 city gates in a row. Hong Jin wanted to die. The city had been breached, and he was the person in charge. How could he still be trusted and used by the mercenaries? Seeing Hong Jin's grievance and self-blame, Song Zhi sighed. He was angry at Hong Jin's uselessness, but what was the use of scolding him now? It would only make the morale of the troops more unstable. Once Hong Jin was pushed into the enemy's camp, it would only help the enemy's strength. All right, this governor knows about this matter. Let's think about how to take the blame and defend the city first. How about this? You immediately bring your men to stop the enemy from entering the city. You don't have to force them out, but you have to at least slow them down. Do you understand? He was not scolded, and his military power was not taken away. Instead, he was given a chance to take the blame. Hong Jin was touched, and his body tensed up as he said, "Governor, please rest assured. As long as I, Hong Jin, am still breathing, I will not let them get here so quickly. Good, if you can defend until dawn, I'll give you a merit." Song Zhi nodded and patted Hong Jin's shoulder confidently. He had a look that said, "I believe in you. Go ahead and do it." The so-called defense until dawn meant that they had to defend the business district and not be attacked before dawn. This was because the provincial office, the Yang family's bank, and the most profitable shops were all gathered in this area. As long as there were no problems here, even if Hanoi City was surrounded, the loss would not be too great. Hong Jin went out with a solemn expression, leaving the platoon leader of the Lung Front platoon, Lu Jian. He started as an auxiliary soldier, step by step until today. He had also been tested for loyalty. Now Lu Jian had completely grown up. His body stood there like a javelin, like a sharp sword that could be unsheathed at any time, giving off a cold, murderous aura. "Platoon leader Lu, gather our soldiers and ask them to retreat. After that, go to the top floor of the watchtower. I'll wait for you." Song Zhi did not need to be too courteous to Lu Jian, who was completely trustworthy. He also did not need to motivate him. He only needed to give the order. Yes. After a standard military salute, Lu Jian turned and left. Song Zhi stood there and could not help but sigh. Looks like I have to use my last resort. The so-called last resort was the top floor of the watchtower. This was another insurance that Yang Chendong left for Song Zhi before he left. The watchtower was similar to the watchtowers during the anti-Japanese war. It was temporarily built with cement after Yang Chendong led the army to occupy Hanoi City. It was for the sake of better monitoring the surrounding environment and safety. However, others did not know that there were two 12.7mm heavy machine guns on the top floor of the watchtowers at the east and west ends of the business district. The full name was QJZ 8912, 7mm heavy machine gun. Theoretical firing rate, 450 to 600 rounds/minute. Effective range, 1,500 meters. It was a killing machine that the 6th young master left for Song Zhi. Unless Erebus had poor vision, otherwise, once this machine gun was fired, no matter how many enemies came, they would only be courting death. This was the reason why Song Zhi insisted that Hong Jin block the enemies outside until dawn. At this time, some people might ask, why not use artillery to attack? Song Zhi quickly gave up on the idea. They were in the city, and if they used the cannons, they would inevitably hurt the civilians. These people had just become citizens of Vietnam, and they did not have a complete sense of belonging. Once the cannons were fired, the entire city would explode, and he would have to clean up the mess. More importantly, due to the destructive power of the artillery, there were only 2 of them in the unstable Vietnam region. Furthermore, there were not many shells, and they were mainly used to intimidate the enemy. If they were really used to kill the enemy, the scale was far from enough. The heavy machine gun was different. It could control its killing range and effectively kill the enemy within a certain distance. It was definitely a powerful weapon. Unfortunately, the ammunition for the machine gun could not be produced by the factory in Cheng City, so there were not many bullets. Therefore, unless it was absolutely necessary, Song Zhe would not use this machine gun. Just as the battle cries from the west and south were incessant, a radio wave had already passed through the city and flew into the distance. On the surface, it seemed that the entire Hanoi city had been surrounded, and not a single person had escaped. However, the news had already spread far and wide. This was a radio station that should have appeared in the 18th century. It should be the second year after the invention of electricity. Because of the arrival of Yang Chendong, it was already used by the mercenaries. This was not only a secret, even if it was announced, not many people would understand it. The news was transmitted over and over again, and it had already been repeated 4 times. Gao Yu, who was in charge of controlling the radio station, could not help but break out in cold sweat. Although he had learned how to operate this thing, this was the first time he had used it alone. Could anyone really accept it? He couldn't help but be worried. What if the other party didn't turn it on because they wanted to save power? Wouldn't his call be useless? Worse still, after a long period of use, who knew when the radio station would run out of power? If that happened, it would be no different from a piece of junk. Gao Yu was very nervous. He could not help but break out in cold sweat. He kept praying in his heart, "Hurry up and receive it. Hurry up and receive it." At this moment, a fleet was sailing on the sea from the direction of Ryukyu Island towards Yunnan Province. The ship was moving at a moderate speed to avoid accidentally bumping into any huge rocks in the shallows. Although it was impossible under normal circumstances, considering that the 6th young master was in the fleet, they absolutely could not allow any accidents to happen. Therefore, the crew was especially careful. Compared to the careful and cautious Navy crew, the more than 10,000 mercenaries on the ship were much more relaxed. Some of them had already gone to sleep, and some of them were sitting together playing poker or chess. When there was no war, they could relax appropriately. This was a combination of work and rest, and Yang Chendong had given special permission. Therefore, although it was late at night, there were still many soldiers who had not gone to sleep. Wang Shan was one of them. Originally, he was in charge of the radio station tonight. Compared with other radio stations, the one with Yang Chendong was on 24 hours a day. As for the problem of power supply, don't be ridiculous. With the 6th young master there, would the battery still be a problem? Because of his excellent performance in the radio training class, and because Wang Shan himself was very clever, he was chosen by Yang Chendong to be a telegraph correspondent. But when the radio station rarely transmitted any news, Wang Shan slowly stopped guarding it even when he was sleeping like before. Just like just now, when he played Do Diju with his comrades for a while, he did not guard the radio station. Chapter 563. But in less than half an hour, after a few rounds, he handed the cards to his comrade beside him and returned to the computer room. He instinctively glanced at the telegraph machine. First, he pushed the door open and took a look. Then, he turned around and wanted to go back to continue playing cards. But then, his body froze. He pulled the door open and saw the telegraph machine flashing with a red light. Wasn't that the signal of a telegram coming in? Whoosh! He sat in front of the telegraph machine and put on his headphones to receive the message. After a while, he quickly left the place and rushed to the place where the 6th young master was resting. Needless to say, the place where Yang Chendong was resting was guarded. But when the guards saw that it was Wang Shan, no one stopped him. This was an order from the 6th young master. Unless he was with the ladies and needed to be informed in advance, this person had the privilege of seeing him at any time. Wang Shan also didn't sleep. He was playing Fight the Landlord with Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei. With Yang Chendong's current status, even if he wanted to have some fun, it was not something that could be done by just anyone. After playing with the regiment commander and battalion commander a few times, he found that they were very restrained. He gave up and replaced them with the people around him. Sure enough, Tiger's Mane, who was very familiar with him, and Beta Persei, who was careless, were not too afraid of him. At least everyone won and lost, which was more interesting. Sixth young master, Wang Shan has an urgent matter to see you. The voice of the first guard, Captain Chiu Vi, who was in charge of security outside the door, suddenly sounded from the other side of the door. Wang Shan, let him in. Yang Chendong thought that something big must have happened. He turned over and got out of bed. Just as he stood there, Wang Shan had already walked in with an anxious face. Sixth young master, a telegram from Hanoi City. Yang Chendong reached out and took the telegram. There were not many words in the telegram, but it was enough to explain everything. Well, someone actually dared to have designs on Hanoi City. They must have eaten a bear's heart and leopard's guts. Just as Yang Chendong frowned, Wang Shan, who was standing in front of him, lowered his head and said with a flushed face, Sixth young master, I was absent just now. I didn't receive the telegram immediately. Please punish me. Yang Chendong raised his eyebrows. He could actually understand the other party. After all, the telegraph might not even ring once in half a year. Who would keep an eye on it all the time? However, since Wang Shan had already said so, if he did not punish him, he was afraid that he would be even more uneasy. Therefore, he pointed at him and said, How about this? Since this is your first offense, you will be fined 1 month's salary. In addition, immediately send a telegram back to Hanoi, saying that we already know about this matter. Tell them to hold on and we will be there soon. Hearing that it was only a month's salary penalty, Wang Shan's face was full of gratitude. He thought that this time he would definitely lose his job. Who would have thought that it would be over so easily? However, the sixth young master also said that this was the first offense, so the punishment was light. At that moment, he decided that the same mistake could not be made a second time. He nodded his head and went out to send the telegram. It seems that it is necessary to arrange an assistant for Wang Shan. Yang Chendong thought thoughtfully. Wang Shan's ability was still very strong, especially when he was very familiar with the code. He could translate the telegram in the shortest time possible. He would not let go of such a talent. Of course, this was only a small matter. How to rescue Hanoi City was the most important thing. Tiger's Mane informed the officers of the 2nd Regiment, 3rd Regiment and above to come for a meeting. In the inner room of the governor's office in Hanoi City, there was an excited shout. There's a reply, there's a reply. Songjia, who was looking at the map of Hanoi City in the outer room, heard such a shout and quickly stepped into the inner room. Who replied to the telegram? What did they say? It's the 6th young master, the 6th young master. He told us to hold on and support us soon. With a face full of excitement, there was a reason to be excited. That was the telegram from the 6th young master. At this moment, Songjia's face was full of relief. Since the message had been sent out, as long as he held on for a week, the reinforcements would definitely come and their crisis would be resolved. Thinking of this, he looked at the transmitter that was already turned off but still had a little bit of warmth. He could not help but show a very envious look. It's good to have such a thing. The matter of sending out the message had been dealt with. The sound of Lu Jian's footsteps could be heard from outside. He had already arranged everything. 2 auxiliary battalions and 6 temporary auxiliary battalions, a total of more than 2,000 people, had retreated to the commercial street that was only about 5 miles away. They were also arranged in various places. If the enemy really broke through the watchtowers, they would be able to take action. It would not be a problem to take care of a few fish that escaped the net. After the matter was settled, Lu Jian came to the office and waited for Songjia's orders. You came at the right time. Bring the cold front platoon and follow me to the watchtower. After seeing Lu Jian, Songjia nodded confidently. After all, with external help, there was hope. All he needed to do was to hold on. The platoon of Cold Front Platoon followed behind Governor Songjia and arrived at the watchtower on the north side of the road. When the key to the door was unlocked and everything in the room was reflected in front of the Cold Front Platoon, there was a series of gasps. To be able to become a member of the elite Cold Front Platoon, one could be considered to have seen a lot. But everything in front of them still gave them a strong visual shock. It was not because of anything else, but because of the heavy metal weapons placed there. Needless to say, there were a total of 10 Type 95 machine guns. In other words, every 3 Cold Front platoon members could have one. In the past, a full company would only be equipped with one high-end weapon. To say that the Type 95 machine gun was high-end was undoubtedly a bit of a slap in the face. Looking at the heavy 12.7mm machine gun on the ground, just the body of the gun and the square buttstock gave off a very imposing feeling. In addition to the golden bullets neatly placed at the side, its lethality was not small. Well, all of this had exceeded the Cold Front platoon's expectations. They could not wait to rush up and play with it and show off their skills. 10 squad machine guns, 2 12.7mm machine guns over here and 2 over there. They are all yours now. Platoon leader Liu will be responsible for distributing them. I only have one request, and that is to not let the enemy rush into the business district. I'm not afraid to tell everyone that what happened here has already been reported to the 6th young master. It won't be long before our reinforcements arrive. Let me ask you, can you hold on? Song Zhe was almost shouting. At this moment, he was betting everything on this platoon of Cold Front platoon members. Yes, including Lu Jian, the 31 Cold Front platoon members replied excitedly. Some of their faces were even flushed. They were already looking forward to their next performance. As long as they performed well and waited for the 6th young master to arrive, how could they be afraid that others would not know of their contributions? Good. Since that's the case, everyone go prepare yourselves. I'm afraid that the enemy will appear at dawn. Take the time to rest and eat. Song Zhe waved his hand. He did not say much about the following matters. He believed that the Cold Front platoon members should know what to do before the battle. They had to guard the 2 towers in the north and south for God knows how many days. Not only did they have to eat and rest, they even had to think about how to relieve themselves. Hanoi City West Gate. General Sai Shi had already led the army into Hanoi City. With the cooperation from both inside and outside, it was almost effortless to enter the city. The only regret was that when they entered the city, they encountered the patrolling mercenaries on the streets. The 2 sides had a short encounter, which alarmed the mercenaries in the city. When they wanted to take a step forward, the resistance became stronger. If they were discovered, then so be it. Initially, Sexy did not expect to be able to sneak into the city. After all, they had the advantage in numbers. Furthermore, they were in Hanoi City. Many of the citizens here had already submitted to the mercenaries. Sexy did not believe that they would still use those powerful cannons to kill them. If that was the case, many civilians would die. This would undoubtedly affect their newly built reputation. Presumably, this was not something that the enemy wanted to see. It was because of this mentality that the army was able to enter Hanoi City without fear. Reality proved that they had guessed correctly. The cannons did not sound at all. Without the suppression of the cannons, the Lansong army was like an arrow piercing through Hanoi City. In a short period of time, they even managed to break through the South Gate. It was at this time that they were met with a strong resistance, and their opponents were the Vietnamese mercenaries led by General Hong Jin. Hong Jin had already lost the city. Now, he was commanding the battle with the mentality of redeeming himself. In order to complete Song Zhe's order to defend the city until dawn, he was going all out. Not only did he send out all the mercenaries in his hands, he even sent out the 500 elite guards that he had imitated Cold Front platoon. In short, he was determined to complete Song Zhe's orders at all costs. Under the orders of death, the Vietnamese mercenaries fought against their superior numbers. Cruel cold weapons battles took place in the streets and alleys. Knives, spears, swords, halberds, axes, hooks, forks, sticks, arrows, shields, anything that could be used, anything that could be imagined, was brought out. Often, when 2 soldiers were fighting, one would slash at the other's body, while the other would stab at the other's abdomen. Fresh blood flowed out, and it was common for both sides to perish together. The moment the Vietnamese mercenaries showed signs of weakness due to their numbers, Hong Jin's 500 elite guards were sent out. They were all wielding thick steel knives with deep blood grooves on them. Once such a weapon slashed someone, the wound would bleed non-stop and splatter in all directions. You're tuning in to the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.